Hello and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham. Once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, it's the new longest episode ever, a new record, and I cannot think of a more worthy subject, someone I've wanted to talk to for years on this show. You may know her from the band The Frumpies. You may know her from Girlsperm. You may know her from My New Boyfriend or Severed Lethargy or Spider on the Webs or The Go Team or Some Velvet Sidewalk or The Old Haunts. Or you may also know her from Bikini Kill. The legend, the punk god, Tobi Vail is on the show today. More on that in 1 second. But first, this is a good one. If you want to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That and an Instagram page and a Facebook page for Turned Out a Punk are all run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, Tristan Abraham, and you will get the message to me. Thank you, Tristan, for all the hard work you do for the show. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at LeftForDamian. To support this show, tell all your friends about it. Let them know about this podcast. You can also subscribe to it and rate it on the platform you're listening to it on. You can head over to turnedoutapunk.com and grab a t-shirt or just keep listening. That's a great way to support too. I play in a band. We're called Fucked Up. You can find out more information over at fuckedup.cc. We have a brand new record coming out we've got a brand new record that's out now called Oberon. Got another new record coming in January. There's a lot going on in Fucked Up world. So once again, head over to fuckedup.cc and find out more for yourself. All right. Man, I flew through that this week. On to today's show. I'm excited. I'm excited for you to hear this one. Tobi Vail is here. I have wanted to talk to Tobi for a very long time. Years ago, I played a show with Tobi in Spider on the Webs with Fucked Up, and it was a great show, but I didn't really get a chance to, sit down and talk to Tobi. So, oh boy, here it is. This is it. This goes all over the place because Tobi's tastes are amazingly all over the place when it comes to punk rock, and someone who connects so many disparate worlds, someone who has brought so much to this culture, who knows so much about this culture. Yeah, I don't know. I want to just prattle on about how much of a fan I am of Tobi and everything she's done, but I think that comes across in the episode. Bikini Kill have announced their 2023 dates, including the much postponed Toronto date where I'll finally get to see them, hopefully. Fingers crossed that I'm not going to be on tour during that. You can find out more information over there at bikinikill.com. If you have not heard Bikini Kill before, you got some homework to do. Check out all the incredible stuff that Bikini Kill has put out, but don't sleep on all the other great bands that Tobi's involved in. Tobi is a hardcore kid lifer, and Girlsperm, Tobi's fantastic latest project, have a brand new LP, The Muse Ascends, and you can find out all about that over there on the internet. More specifically at thrillingliving.bandcamp.com, and you can check out Girlsperm stuff over there. It's a super group. There's lots of great people in this band. A fantastic record. Pick that up now. That's it. I don't want to prattle on anymore. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Tobi Vail on Turned Out a Punk. Tobi, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
Well, as I was kind of telling you off air, you are kind of like one of the penultimate guests for this thing, and I've been doing it now for I guess 8 years, which feels weird to say, but I've wanted to talk to you for this thing since day one because I feel like, I just feel like you connect so many disparate worlds of punk music, and you just reading things you've written over the years on your blog or in Jigsaw, just you have this sort of passion for putting together this punk rock puzzle in the same way that I kind of feel that passion. So I can't wait to do this with you.
Cool.
Well, I got to start it off, though, the way they all start off, which is, Tobi, how did you get into punk, though? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
So I've obviously been thinking about this question, and I have to say that I do not know the answer. But the reason why I don't know it might be interesting. Basically, I probably saw it on TV. I was looking on YouTube because I was like, uh, I sort of remember like punk being on 60 Minutes, like when this either like when the Sex Pistols were in the US or maybe even before that, but I couldn't find any of that. But so basically like I got into it just because I was a music fan. And but like at first when I saw it on TV, I was like 8 years old or 7 or 8, 9 years old. And I remember the safety pin through the cheek and just
Yes.
being like incredibly horrified. Like, why are these people doing that, mom? And just trying to understand. It got stuck in my head, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like Jaws. Like, it was just like visceral horror. Like, these people are like puking and cutting themselves and like hurting themselves. And they look like zombies, like Night of the Living Dead. Like, it was really freaky to me at the time.
I think that footage too of the guy pulling on the safety pin in the cheek is, I think it's the same footage I saw. It was like later used in one of those rock and roll documentaries, and it's the Sex Pistols Atlanta show, I believe, maybe where they're
Yeah,
doing
I
it.
did see that one. It was like NBC or something, or I'm not.
Yeah.
My mom was like, "Yeah, I remember that," but like I couldn't really remember. So then I asked my dad, and he was like, "Oh, we read about it in Rolling Stone," and I was like, "I don't really remember reading." I definitely saw it on TV. So yeah, my parents were into. They very quickly got into all of the bands like Elvis Costello and the Clash and Devo and like my mom really liked the Ramones and Devo, and my dad really liked Elvis Costello. Like he was obsessed with Elvis Costello. And so that was probably third grade for me. So that was like 78 around then, 78, 79.
We're
And I just thought my parents were weird, but like I didn't really know how weird they were because we lived in the woods. So we were sort of like not really in any kind of pop culture universe. So like our like knowledge of rock and roll was like and movies and all that was like heavily curated. Like I would say by my parents and my uncle who was a film critic in Seattle.
well, given how your parents loved all that early punk stuff, were they like fans of like the Sonics and the Wailers and all that kind of proto punk stuff that was going on in the Pacific Northwest?
My dad, yeah, my dad's a drummer and he like grew up in like he's a little bit older. I mean, sorry, a little bit younger than the Sonics, but he grew up in that same area, not Tacoma, but Auburn. And so he plays drums exactly like that style of Sonics kind of. Yeah.
It's awesome. And I was talking with Ben Gibbard about it, how like, in the same way AC/DC permeates every band from Australia's DNA on some level, it seems. I feel that's kind of like the Sonics in the Pacific Northwest too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you could fast forward to like when I actually started playing drums or, getting into local music. And I just remember like at that point, like, we were living back in Olympia and my dad was playing in a band again. So he had his drums set up. And, I decided at some point that I was, after really rejecting it, like I had decided at one point I was interested. So I was like, well, show me your punk records. And he got out, the Sex Pistols, like the Rosillos, but he also got out the Sonics and the Kinks, like You Really Got Me and stuff like that. And I was trying to figure out how to learn how it all sort of fit together.
Because I can hear that in your drumming. That kind of like, I guess, Pacific Northwest garage stomp
Yeah,
to
for
it.
sure. Yeah, and that was like my dad's level of instruction. He was like, just listen to this. It wasn't like he showed me anything. But yeah, definitely an influence. But like to go back to like when we were living in the woods, like we lived in this logging town in the 70s that was it's called Nasell. It's like across the bridge from Astoria. It's like right on the Oregon border.
Mhm.
And like, people talk about like, how can you still live in Olympia? It's such a small town. I was like, you have no idea what a small town is. Like this is like an hour into the woods from Aberdeen, like, and it's a logging town. And we lived there because my dad got a job at the jail. And so we lived in this apartment building in the woods and there's no town. There's like a grocery store, there's a bank, there's like five churches, and there's just like there's nothing there. And like TV barely came in, and we got like a little bit of radio, but it was we were way out there. Like
Yeah, and Olympia is a pretty cool small town. For like small towns, like it's unlike any
it's
other one.
not small. I still
Yeah,
reject this idea. It's not small. It's like there's like tens of thousands of people that live in this area. Like this is like there was like 300 people that lived there, and like even that, like I'm like, where did all those people live? Like I only saw like 20. Like,
yeah.
and so like I really didn't fit in there at all, and it was whatever fitting in is, but so then when we moved back to Olympia, I was like, oh, I got another chance, to like make friends or, whatever, like connect with people and not be such a weirdo. But yeah, as soon as I got to school here, I was like, I think like I just didn't really know how weird my parents were. So I like talked to people like, like Devo or, and they were just like, what? Huh? I'm like, obviously, like this is like 79, 80 or whatever, and so I was like so trying really hard to connect with kids. And like I met this girl in my neighborhood, and she had a skateboard, and I had a skateboard, and I didn't really have a bicycle. I had a skateboard for some reason. And then I was like, oh, that girl has a skateboard. I don't know I've never met any girls that has skateboards. So I thought she was really cool. And I was like, but she looked like really heavy metal, like feathered hair and all that. And I remember the first thing she said was like, "Oh, I'm going to be the first girl quarterback on the NFL." And I was like,
That's
"Okay, this
awesome.
is really weird." There's no girls that play football. It's just you play football. I was like, "No." And then so basically, like through our friendship, she was super into heavy metal. She really was. She'd gone to see Black Sabbath. She had older brothers and sisters, and she liked Rush and April Wine and like Ted Nugent, all this shit my dad would like, just roll his eyes about or whatever. But, she liked the Cars. And I was like, oh, the Cars. Like, okay, so the Cars, she knows the Cars, so we can listen to that. And anyways, like she ended up becoming my best friend. And like I was trying to get her kind of to go new wave, and she was trying to get me to go like heavy metal, and we would just like skate around and kind of like fight about music and stuff. And then eventually we just both went punk rock. So that was the common ground.
And isn't that the legendary kind of story they tell about, I guess, mainly music in Seattle, but it's sort of that twin, it's the metal meeting the punk new wave kind of thing, and
Yeah.
and something coming out of the middle.
And we had like a really great radio station. I mean, it was pop music, like, 80s new wave or whatever, but like it was great. Like for a long time, it was really good. It was called KYYX, and from Seattle. And so I got her listening to that. And we went to see the Go-Go's, and they became my favorite band. I joined the fan club. I was like really obsessed. So she got into the Go-Go's, and that was cool. Oh, but the Ramones like was probably the first punk band that I liked, because my parents, like when we were living in the woods or whatever, like they would go to like the record stores and buy records. So I remember one time they came home and they had four records. And this was like 1978. And it was like Road to Ruin, Are We Not Men, Devo, probably the first or the second Elvis Costello record, I'm not sure, and Parallel Lines by Blondie. So like, that was kind of like, I didn't know that was the same thing as the Safety Pin, and it's not
Yeah.
really. So I didn't know I didn't know any of that was weird. Like Blondie became pop music very quickly, so people knew Blondie or whatever. But like the Ramones, I had no clue that they're even supposed to be punk. Like, and I loved them, and my sister loved them. She was just a little kid. But we went to see Rock and Roll High School when it came to Seattle, and it was like a double feature with that John Ritter movie, like Americathon. Do you know that
Oh
movie?
yeah. I'm trying.
Really weird.
Yeah, from the video store, I can picture the cover.
It's a really weird movie. But anyway, so like we saw it in the theater. So of course, I just thought the Ramones were like the biggest band in the world, and just really had no idea that they weren't like Cheap Trick or whatever. But yeah, like I Heidi, into my best friend, I got her into the Ramones and the Go-Go's. So she didn't really succeed in getting me into metal. I got into some of it like a little bit later through like the Melvins and stuff, but like definitely not at that point.
There's some interesting metal stuff too that comes out of the Pacific Northwest, like that band Enemy, and there's some like weird proto death metal and sludgy stuff too. Obviously, the Melvins type stuff as well.
Yeah, and then like my parents also they took me and Heidi to out to Evergreen when Decline of Western Civilization played, and that I think it was like right around when it came out, like 1982 or something.
Yeah.
And I remember my mom, who was like, I thought was really weird, and she liked Devo and the Ramones and the B-52s, that kind of stuff. Um, she was horrified by Decline. She was just horrified. Like she was just like, she didn't like what Black Flag had to say. She didn't like what Darby had to say. She was just like, oh wow, that's really disturbing, and we were kind of intrigued, like and I think that like people don't really understand, maybe like younger people don't really understand like that would come to like look at hardcore or punk or American stuff from that era to realize like how offensive it was to like hippies and baby boomers, like who were basically our parents, and it really was disturbing them to see these kids like the thing, what does Ron Reese say? He says something like, he has like picks up the underwear and he's like, this is from one of my victims or whatever. And then like, Darby says like a racial slur or something. And I don't know, it's just, you're just kind of like, oh, you're not supposed to say stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, it's a little scary. And then they, on KYYX, they started having this radio show called, on Monday nights called Hardcore Mondays. And it was like, normally they'd be playing like Thompson Twins, Culture Club, Go-Go's, that kind of stuff. But on Hardcore Mondays, they play like Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, Heidi and I started getting into that. But also like my dad, both my parents, like they would go down to Berkeley and Oakland and visit their friends. And they went to see like Mabuhay Gardens shows. Like they saw like the No Sisters and Pearl Harbor and the Explosions. They saw like X play like a dorm at Berkeley or something.
That's
And
awesome.
that was all really early. They saw the Clash in like 1979. And I remember like my mom and dad went to see the Specials and the Police at a really small show at the Showbox in Seattle. It was like 1981. And they came home and my mom woke me up and she was probably kind of drunk. And she was like, I'm going to teach you kids how to do the pogo. Mom, just like let us sleep, okay? So it was kind of like this weird thing of like one time my mom was like, hey, I'm gonna take you and Heidi to the Ramones. And I was like, Mom, I have a book report due tomorrow. Like I don't want to go. And she took my sister and I was like, of course, she's like, you're gonna regret it. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So I could have seen the Ramones with DOA, but I didn't want to go apparently. And I was like, it wasn't like I didn't like them. I did. I just was, trying to rebel in all these confusing ways. But then my mom and dad also, like, my dad was playing in this band called the Tapeworms, which were, they're sort of based on in Oakland and Olympia. They're like a recording project, which is why they call the Tapeworms. They recorded with Steve Fisk at Evergreen. And then my mom knew about some of those bands, like in the early 80s, like the West Side Lockers and, Millions of Bugs. They're these kind of like new wavy power pop bands. And they had like the Sub Pop 5 cassette or whatever. So that, they knew a little bit about that stuff. But yeah, when Decline came out and like we started getting more interested in hardcore, my parents were really not into that. They weren't into the music and they thought it was disturbing. And I remember Heidi and I were like skateboarding around our neighborhood and we used to like go into these areas like on the edge, like the sprawl of the neighborhood where like there was housing foundations and they were like building more tract housing or whatever. And we found this housing foundation that had like a cigar box in it and it had like some cigarettes and a lighter and it had like these tapes. And they were punk tapes. Like some kid was hiding their like cigarettes and like their punk tapes that they were hiding from their parents. And so we like took, we got our Walkman and we put it on. I was like, what is this music? And then like, so we took the tape home and we like copied it. We like taped the tape and then we put it back and we like write this kid notes, but we didn't know who they were. We kind of figured out later, but anyways, like, so then we're just like on this quest, like who, like they didn't have any track listings. So we're like, who are these bands on this tape? And it's like, I think like one of them was like Ill Repute and one of them was like the Freeze, but it took us so long to figure it out. It was like kind of like a scavenger hunt for us to like go around and try to meet people that might know the songs that were on that tape.
That's awesome. What a cool story of finding punk tapes.
Yeah, it was weird. But then, you know, like we got older and we started taking the bus downtown to skateboard. And then my mom took us to the show. It was like Rock Against Reagan, and it was at the Capitol steps, and it was that band Stick Against Stone were doing like a tour with a school bus and having local bands play to try to get Reagan to not be reelected or whatever. So that was like October 83. And there's all these skateboarders there that were like our age, you know, and there's like, oh, these guys definitely know the bands on the tape. You know, we have to meet these people. But it was also like really scary. Like my mom was like, oh, you guys know how to, you know, skateboard, go skate with those guys. And like our skateboards were like 70s, you know, like plasticky kind of looking boards that you would get just like at the mall or, you know, like a Fred Meyer or something. And, you know, these were like real skate punks. And so, yeah, after we kind of were on a quest, we go downtown and walk around and then be like, follow these kids around and then ask them, you know, what music they liked and stuff like that. And then that way we started finding out about shows and, you know, eventually we went to some shows like downtown in the alley that like Beat Happening played and like this band called Mr. Yuck that were some skaters that were our age. And then I think it was like maybe a couple months later, we saw the Wipers play out at Evergreen with Pell Mell. And we didn't go. My mom didn't take us. We just found out about it from our friend's older brother and we took the bus out there. So we were probably like 14. And then after that, the Tropicana opened in Olympia, which was the first all ages club that it was around from like 84 to 85 and like all the bands played there. And so we just went to all those shows and that at that point we were just, you know, full-fledged punk rockers.
Going back before that point, it's fascinating how punk kind of goes to Seattle first. Like it's almost like Detroit in that way. Like you've got the Tupperwares and this sort of wave of kids that were like on board right from the get-go. I guess it goes back to like all that proto-punk that we were talking about. But were your parents like familiar with like China Caminas and the Max and the Beakers and those types of bands?
I kind of doubt it. They had like that one Sub Pop 5 tape.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad was also like, you know, communicating a lot with his bandmate down in Berkeley. And like I said, they would go down there and see bands. And for some reason they were obsessed with this band, the No Sisters. My dad was like, it was like everyone looked like Elvis Costello. It was like 4 Elvis Costellos. And, you know, he really was a big Elvis Costello fan. So
I have the 7-inch and they all do look shockingly like Elvis Costello.
Yeah, he really liked for whatever reason. I don't really even know what they sound like, but he talked about them a lot. But I don't know that they knew like people up in Seattle so much. I do know that at one point, this is kind of funny, like, you know, like I was saying, like I didn't know the Ramones were punk, and if I knew that, I think I would have been disturbed because I did think that the safety pin in the cheek thing was really disturbing.
Yeah.
And I thought about it a lot actually, like kind of like those are like monster people or, you know, Walking Dead or something. But like I remember my dad got this tape in the mail, and him and his friend and the tapeworms would like they would exchange tapes that they were tracking on their 4-tracks and, you know, song ideas through the mail. So we'd get these packages all the time. But at the beginning of the tapes, sometimes there'd be like the new single that he just bought. So he'd record it for us and we'd listen to it. And I was like, what is this music? It's so good. And it was, this is like 1979 or something. It was the first Avengers EP.
Oh, that's wild. That's
and
awesome.
I was like, I loved it. And my dad was like, well, I got to tell you, that's punk rock. And I was just like, no, that's not punk rock. Like I was like, he's like, yeah, that's punk rock. That's a punk rock band right there. You like it. And I was just like, oh my God, I like a punk band. I don't want anyone at school to find out, you know.
Did the tapeworms ever record records, or is it just tapes?
Nope, they just have tapes. They didn't even release them. They just, you know, it's kind of like an ongoing project. They still exist.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere to hear it, or is it just for you guys?
They might have some stuff online. I feel like they had a
Okay.
MySpace at one point. They might have like a SoundCloud or something. Yeah, we're trying to get them to record because it's actually the same person that was in my dad's band, like all of his early bands, like in the 60s. It's like his guitar player that he's worked with his whole life.
That's awesome. What is it? What's the vibe of the band? Or I guess it changes, right? 'Cause it's been around for so
Changes,
long.
yeah. I don't know, like I don't know how to describe it. Another really big influence on the both of them was Bruce Springsteen. Like my dad, my family is like big Springsteen fans, and I was never. I shouldn't say I was never, but I was in the 80s. I was not a Bruce Springsteen fan. In the 70s, I liked it. But that was like that's like a weird thing, like that growing up in my family and not being a Bruce Springsteen fan. That's like, kind of like that's probably me rebelling, I guess.
Yeah, that's your
Like,
outlier.
it's very songwritery, but it's also like, kind of like, they're coming from that Sonics kind of place and the Wailers kind of place where it's garage, but it's also like R&B kind of like really fueled up, fast R&B type music. I mean, that's how I would see it.
It's also interesting how there's such a strong connection between, and I guess it's because it's such a major city close by, but between Seattle and sort of the Bay Area, San Francisco, like how many bands moved down there from that first wave, right? From the Mentors to the Lewd to the Screamers, I guess moving down to LA, but like I guess everyone just kind of like moved south from
Yeah.
that very
And I
first
guess
wave.
the reason why I thought of that is because I guess Penelope Houston was living in Seattle too, or from there or something.
Hmm.
Which, yeah, like so I didn't know that. It was, I even remember when we started Bikini Kill, like just being like, I don't think there's ever been a band better than the Avengers. Maybe we should try to be that good, like like just kind of go back to that.
That's
Like that
awesome.
was one of the starting points for me of like what I wanted like to do. And obviously they were super influenced by the Sex Pistols, but I definitely got into them before I got into the Sex Pistols. I remember seeing PIL on TV on American Bandstand, and that was a big moment because it was like breaking the wall or whatever. I was like, oh, this is so weird.
That's one of the all-time great TV band performances. Like when he's pushing all the people from the audience onto the stage, like
Yeah. And it was exciting because we watched American Bandstand like every week, me and my mom and my sister. And it was like, oh God, like this is really weird. It was funny, but it was kind of scary too. I don't know why, like maybe it's just like because I was a child, but like I was really actually like viscerally afraid of punk.
yeah, I think it was, especially the way it was presented. Even by the time a few years later when I started seeing it pop up around my kind of like world, it was presented as being something so adversarial and confrontational. Like you were saying, that swastika, that immediately sets off alarm bells. Like it's not like an
Oh
appealing
yeah.
thing.
For sure. And there was kids in the Tropicana scene. There was one kid that was he actually wasn't white. He was like from Korea, but like he had for a short time was like wearing a swastika shirt. And I was like, oh man, I can't let my mom see me with this guy, like
Mhm.
and in my head I was like, I know he doesn't mean it, but that way or whatever, but like she wouldn't understand, and it's like, well, now when I think back on them, like, I don't really understand.
No.
Like, other than that, he was like a really big Sid Vicious Sex Pistols fan.
That seems to be, I guess, where it kind of permeated from. Like, that band Pure Hell from New York. Have you ever heard of that band? Fantastic first wave all black punk band that's just killer. And I was looking for a photo of them to put in something I was writing, and I could not find one without them wearing swastika shirts, but they were also backing up Sid Vicious in his band at that point too. So I think it was part of the uniform at a certain level.
Yeah, and obviously, like, I mean, especially the era we're living through now, like that stuff is so loaded. But
Oh yeah.
you know, and where I feel like now it just seems like absurd, that people were doing that. But yeah, different context, different, I don't know, like a band like the Mentors or something like that. Like people can say like, oh yeah, like it's funny, it was a joke, or even like the Meat Men or something like that. It's like it's funny, it's a joke. It's like, yeah, I mean, okay, so maybe they didn't mean it, but like, there's still like it feeds into this whole like culture of like hating women
Mm.
and like where there's actual real violence happening.
Well, it's like, do you know? Are you familiar with the band White Pride from St. Louis?
No.
They're like weirdly Jeff Tweedy, the original roadie for Wilco was in this band, and they were kind of a band with members weren't all white for this band, and it was very much them sending up neo Nazis and making fun of it. But years later, a neo Nazi label bootlegged the recording, and not everyone got the quote unquote joke.
Yeah.
Also, have you seen that Mentors documentary that came out?
No.
It really does not it does not paint a really nice picture, as you can
Yeah.
imagine, but there's a chunk in it where the guitar player is quite adamant that it wasn't all a joke, which makes it kind of irredeemable.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going by like what older people would say or whatever. But
Mhm.
I mean, we can talk about anything you want, but like that year of the Tropicana in Olympia was really that was my formative scene, that was it. And it was over by like early 85. And all the bands that played there, like, I mean, it started out and it was just like a lot of local bands, and the Melvins played their first shows there that were not like, in the Montesano Thriftway parking lot or whatever. And then they would play there all the time. And then like bands like the Fastbacks and Green River and Girl Trouble from Tacoma and Noxious Fumes. There's a bunch of hardcore bands from here like that people don't know about, like uh
Gestures of
Immoral
Chaos.
Immoral Roberts, Idol Worship, um NBS, Nazi Boy Scouts. That was like ex Mr. Yuck. And then I don't know, Disturbed Peace, Nile Obstat. There was like all these weird bands of kids, and then of course Beat Happening, and then Young Pioneers and Wimps. These are different Wimps and different Beat Happening, or different, not Beat, the same Beat Happening,
Young
but
Pioneers. Yeah,
different
different
Young Pioneers.
yeah.
And then I remember the 3 o'clock played.
From
Like
LA, that band?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember they played right away. That was like one of the first shows, maybe the first out of town shows. And I was like, oh my God, this band, they're just playing to like in Olympia to just for $5 or $3 or whatever. And they're like as good as the Go-Go's. Like I was blown away by that. I was just like, I couldn't explain to people how great it was. I was like, the level, I mean, it was, and I was no musician at that point really, but I was like, they're so good. They're just like incredible. They were so good. And like all these mod kids came down from Seattle on their scooters, and yeah, it was wild. But then, like another time it'd be like Butthole Surfers or 45 Grave or like the Crucifix or D. Kreutzen or Slayer played there like in like June 84.
Like on the 12-inch tour, I guess, right? Or even before that, maybe?
I don't know. I remember we went to their sound check, and it was like they were driving like a sports car. I remember that. There was like they came to sound check at like noon or something, and we just went there in the afternoon, and they were playing. So I was like, this is interesting.
That's
The
awesome.
Accused played there. The Rejectors. I don't know. There's yeah, a ton of bands.
So
The
I get
Unit.
did 10-minute warning, is that kind of that era, I guess, too? Or is that later?
I think no, I don't remember 10 Minute Warning playing there. Green River played there several times. And then this band called Vampire Circus, He Sluts, those are Tacoma bands. I feel like Patty Schummel's little brother was maybe in one of those bands, but I can't really remember. Larry, he's in, what is he in? Death Valley Girls.
Yeah, yeah. When Patty was on the show, we talked about some of the, I think we might have even talked about his whole band on that one too.
Yeah, and I feel like I met her there. Like I feel like there a lot of Tacoma people would come to Olympia. And then I feel like I'm forgetting some big things that happened. JFA, Bang, Tales of Terror. There, I mean, it was great. It was amazing.
Everyone.
But then also like Op Magazine was from here, so they had this like Op Magazine music conference, and that was really weird. It was like White House played, and
What? Did you see that?
yeah.
What was the show like?
I just remember it was piercingly loud.
Okay.
like
Yeah.
very like I mean like beyond harsh noise, like very very trebly loud.
Yeah.
Like you had to kind of go outside. I don't remember anything about the performance. I just remember the sound. It was like painful. And it was interesting though to me. Michael Board played that. I think maybe Eugene Chadbourne, John Foster, who was the one of the people who did Op Magazine, performed, and some of there was this band called Wild Wild Spoons. And I don't know if you're familiar with that book, Cassette Mythos, some of the
No.
early. Do you know about Op Magazine? It was like based in Olympia, and it was done in the early 80s, and it was all independent music. They would review and cover independent music. They went through the whole alphabet. There's the A issue, all the way through. And they had like a policy of like not to have like a white male on the cover, I guess, which is kind of interesting because and it wasn't just punk, it was all kinds of music on independent labels. So the radio station out there, Chaos, had the same policy where if you got a radio show, you could only play 20% of your music could come from major labels. 80% had to be independent. So I got a radio show pretty much right away. Like, well, not right away, but I guess it was like in the end of 85. I started doing that. And, we just volunteered, and we could go out to the record library and listen to everything and just tape it and hang out and play whatever we wanted. It was great.
When did you move to Eugene? Because I know you moved to Eugene, Oregon for a little while, right?
Yeah, I moved there in 88, so that was like after high school. But yeah, like I started, doing the radio show well before that, and started playing in bands after the Tropicana closed. After the Tropicana closed, it was like a real bummer because we had to go to Seattle to see all ages shows. And then, of course, as everyone knows, they banned all ages shows in Seattle after the like infamous Circle Jerks riot at Guerrilla Gardens. But we went to see after Tropicana closed, we were just like addicted to going to see these hardcore bands. So, go see 7 Seconds, TSOL, like I don't know who else. The Melvins, every time they played, we try to go. But I was still like 15, 16. I didn't have a car, so we had to get rides, and sometimes you get stuck there and it'd be crazy. Oh, DOA would play Olympia too. They played the Tropicana, and they also played Guerrilla Gardens, I think. And then after that was Community World Theater in Tacoma, and we would all go to see shows there.
I saw you tweeting the other day about Beyond Possession, and they're such a fantastic band. Really obscure up here, but
See, that
amazing.
was like, I was kind of like preparing for this. And so I was like, I should look at some of these bands I barely remember, and I do remember like when I saw The Accused at the Tropicana, I was like, well, this is very different, obviously they were influenced by metal, and as I said, like I had no background in that other than like Kiss. Like I knew who they were, but it was kind of like the Ramones, where like I didn't know the Ramones were punk. Like I didn't know that Kiss were even like, I thought Kiss was like a cartoon,
Yeah.
like I mean there was like the Paul Lynde Halloween special, and they were Kiss Meets the Phantom
The
was like an
movie,
episode
yeah.
of Scooby-Doo and stuff. Like I didn't really understand, like, and the Ramones just kind of seemed like the Archies or like Josie and the Pussycats, like a comic book band, Bubblegum or something. But it was, it was kind of, so with The Accused, it was like, wow, these guys they're actually incredible. They're incredible. And then obviously the Melvins went through their like very fast phase, and then they got Dale. I remember, I think I saw the first Melvins show. Buzz told me I saw the first one, but then if you look it up, it's like, well, that wasn't really the first one because they played a couple times in Montesano or Aberdeen or something. But like for all practical purposes, they were the
The
first show.
real first show, yeah, the official
Yeah,
first show.
before Dale was in the band. And then like I was talking to them a couple years ago, and I was like, oh yeah, well, I didn't really like you guys at first. I remember the first time I actually liked you was when you opened for DOA, and they're like, that was Dale's first show. And I was like, okay. And Dale was like, yes. And I was like, yeah, you weren't that good until Dale joined, And then, at that point, I was like, well, these guys are incredible. So I had to kind of open my mind to like, this kind of heavy music or whatever. And then they like slowed down or whatever. But so anyways, I saw Beyond Possession play, I don't know if it was with False Liberty or The Accused or the Melvins, or I don't really know, Poison Idea maybe, but it was at this place called the Crescent Ballroom in Tacoma, and I didn't remember anything about it, so I was like, I don't, I think they're a skate band, so I like looked it up and I was like, holy shit, like they're incredible.
Hmm.
They're totally incredible. Like all of, and it kind of started coming back to me. I was like, oh, I remember sitting on the stage and watching this guy play drums, which is something I would do a lot. And in fact, that got me into trouble at the Tropicana. Like, I remember I was watching the Crucifix and I was like sitting on the side of the stage, like watching the drummer, which, as we know, he went on to be in Sonic Youth. I'm forgetting his name right now, even though I
Steve
know
Shelley.
Steve Shelley, yeah. So
Yeah.
I was like watching the drummer because I was like, this guy's incredible. And like I was like 14 or something, and Doc Dart like picked me up like with both shoulders and threw me against the wall, like as he like just went manically like across the room or whatever. And I was like, okay, so there's immediately like I saw like stars. I almost got like knocked out. And then but of course, like I was like also just like really thrilled in this way because I was like, this is incredible because it was the Crucifix and like, they're incredible. So you're just totally, and I was like, oh, there's no outside. There's no like standing over here. Like you're in the show and it's dangerous. Like that was, the message or whatever. And then I think back, I'm like, oh yeah, like if I had been at that show and I saw like the singer for this band, like basically physically assault like a 14-year-old girl, I would have been like, no, fuck that guy. But like
Yeah.
the girl was me. And I was just like, oh my God, this is incredible, So um
He
yeah, I mean, there was like a lot of violence at shows too. It wasn't that weird for something like that to happen.
he's a guy who also I think in the last few years like a lot more stories have come out about, but like another guy who like you're saying like has that kind of low key, not Gigi Allen level or anything, but like that low key kind of like this wouldn't fly in present day kind of energy.
Yeah, but also like, there's also that feeling of like when you went to a punk show, I mean, it was like watching a horror movie in a way, like you were like what I'm talking about, like that kind of like safety pin thing, like it was scary. Like you
Mm.
thought you might die, like it like I would feel like that, like and that's one of the moments I can pinpoint. And it's not like I don't know, like, I don't have kids, but like I'm close with some of my friends' kids. So I'm thinking of like, my friend's kid who's 15. I was like, yeah, if I saw him do that to her, I would not like that band. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to shows years later in a post Nirvana kind of environment where this is a little more mainstream, but there's still shit that I was privy to and saw where now I have a 13-year-old and that's when I was starting to go to shows. I'm like, there's no way in hell I'd want
Yeah,
him doing this stuff or seeing the stuff that I was around at that age.
for sure. And like, uh, in some ways I got like really burnt out on hardcore, like, pretty immediately. Like, I mean, it's not hardcore, like, as we would say now, but like, what is that kind of like generic kind of uniform? Like, you have to follow these rules. And, unfortunately, like a lot of my interest in certain scenes were sort of like I'm totally ignorant of, like, because I associate it with these like really fucked up people that, like there was some kids that were into Boston and New York hardcore and they were just assholes, and I was like, so I remember like my friend borrowed like an SSD record from one of those guys, and I just in my head I was like, oh, that band must be assholes because these assholes like them,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like I don't even remember like reconsidering that until like many years later, and that you're just like filtered through all this kind of prejudice in a way. But I was really drawn to like bands like Die Kreuzen, and I actually was like a huge Fang fan. And obviously that guy killed
That got a
someone.
little weird.
Yeah. So, and now you don't go around saying how much you are a Fang fan, but
No.
sorry, they're great. They really were a great band,
Yeah. Well, that's
Or like say like verbal abuse. Like one of my friends, like, you know, went home with one of those guys, and we were 14,
yeah.
and just it's a lot of weird stuff happened.
It's like this weird, amazing Neverland place that I'd like to paint it as on this show, where like you as a young person you can express yourself and be on stage and get considered seriously by adults, but it's also a place with not a lot of supervision, a built-in distrust of authority that allows predators to kind of thrive and survive. in a lot of these scenes, sadly.
Yeah, I
Horribly.
mean, but then, there's the other side of that too, where like, and I experienced both sides of it for, as a kid, but there's the other side of it too, where like, if you are in an all ages scene, you have older people around, and they kind of look out for the younger people. Like the vast majority of like older guys really looked out for us.
Mm.
They'd be like, somebody would get too drunk. Like, I mean, we were drinking at 14 or, whatever, like doing bad shit. And, someone would get too fucked up, and then like some older guys who weren't assholes or predators would be like, no, we need to get her, over here. You need to take your friend home and like give us rides and stuff like that. Whereas like, say my sister, who was a cheerleader and, kind of in a completely different kind of adolescent party scene, they didn't have that going on. And I think that that's like a kind of like a positive side,
Mm.
like I ended up hanging out, like all my early boyfriends were much older than me, because like the guys my own age like really freaked me out. Like, I just didn't feel respected.
Yeah. I guess it's like, well, it's everyone's experience is so different in this thing, and
Yeah,
even within the same scenes, right? Like just depending on who
for
you wind
sure.
up
Yeah.
around.
But like as I'm talking about stuff, I'm also thinking about like when the Black Flag played with Beat Happening at the Tropicana, and everyone's seen that flyer, but Henry was like really giving Calvin a hard time on stage, just like,
Yeah.
interrupted the show. And, there's a tape of it. I don't know if you've ever heard it,
It's
but,
an infamous one. It's one of the ones that like, and there's a few of these with Black Flag, which just kind of circulates and becomes, almost legendary at a certain point. And in this case, it's not for the right reasons, but this is one of those ones that just is, yes, very storied in terms of a live Black Flag set.
yeah, well, I mean, what happened was like Calvin was doing his dance, and like me and my friends were these girls that were obsessed with Be Happening. We're dancing, and then, it's a super punk show, like with all these Mohawk kids and stuff. And, uh, I just remember like Rollins was like over here, like against the wall, and then like he came up to like Calvin, and basically he like took my friend's, the way I remember is he took my friend's hand, who was probably like 13 or something, and like put it on Calvin's crotch, and she was just like trying to get away, and then like Calvin stopped playing, they'd be having to stop playing, and then like Henry said something like, oh, I just can't control myself, or some, just like giving him shit for like being like, I don't know, too femme or something like that, or too girly, or swinging his hips around, or, doing something cute or something, and having like the girls like all being into it. And then like, Calvin was just really funny, and he's just like, oh, that's what your mom always says. Like he started like playing the dozens with Henry, and they were just like getting into this weird thing. And like I was watching the whole thing, I was like, this is so weird. Like that's the guy from Black Flag. Like it was making me really nervous. And then so afterwards I was like, hey Calvin, are you okay? And like he was like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm a little weird, or whatever. But like after that, like I think like a lot of people in Olympia just thought like Henry was like really macho and didn't get punk or whatever. And maybe like people would be like, oh, he was not even my favorite singer at Black Flag or whatever.
That's where it
But
starts.
yeah, but like, I mean, Henry just came to see Bikini Kill like in 2019 or whatever. Like, he's not a bad guy. He's like not, he's not anti-girl or anti-feminist or anything. But at the time, it was like these different worlds like colliding. It was like, are you tough or are you a wimp? That kind of shit.
Well, that's why Beat Happening to me is such like, and I guess Go Team too, by extension, like you're so punk to kind of like out punk, like where it's threatening to these dudes where, this masculinity is obviously just a facade that insecure men put up as this sort of like wall, and it's so shakable and fallible, and like you see it in punk, and Beat Happening was forcing guys to confront that within themselves in a very direct way, I think.
I mean, to this day, I do not understand exactly what was happening. Like I'm like, I don't know. Like, did they
There,
just think that he sucked, or
well,
I don't know,
is Calvin's from DC, right?
He's from Olympia and DC. He's part of the big connection between the two scenes.
Mm-hmm. So, like, did he know? Maybe, like, were they familiar with each other from out there, or not?
I
Not
kind of
even.
doubt it. I
Yeah.
kind of doubt it because I think Calvin like maybe went to high school. I don't know. His mom moved to Baltimore. I think what happened is his mom moved to Baltimore. Calvin's actually from Ellensburg, Washington, where the Screaming Trees are from. And that's kind of how the Olympia and the Screaming Trees, because I saw the first Screaming Trees show too, and they're a great band. But anyway, I think Calvin like moved maybe his mom moved to DC and he still was in high school or something. But yeah, he knew some of those people. I met Cynthia Connolly through Calvin and they were friends and I'm not exactly sure how, but Brendan Canty's sister lived here, so he would come out here sometimes. And I remember one time, like it was after the Rites of Spring record had come out. It was probably like 85 or 86 and I was listening to Chaos and like Brendan was just all of a sudden like on Calvin's radio show. And I was like, the guy from Rites of Spring is in Olympia? Like, this is really weird. Cause I was at that point like really obsessed with DC punk and hardcore or whatever. And that Revolution Summer and all that. And they were playing that tape of that band, The Brief Weeds.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so I was really confused and intrigued by that. But yeah, like I was into all different kinds of music. Like Salem 66 was one of my favorite bands. I really liked that compilation that Gerard put out, Bands That Could Be God, that with like Sorry and
Deep Wound,
Deep Wound.
Christmas.
Yeah, I played like something off of that record like on my radio show like weekly. Like I really was into that. And I had this idea that Boston was like somewhere really cool. I just based on that record, you know.
Hmm. It's a
But
cool
also,
comp.
yeah. I
Well, it's a
didn't know about like the hardcore scene really, as you know, I was saying like because there's these jerks that were into that music here. But you know, well, I mean Deep Wound, but other than that, yeah, like that kind of college rock thing and the Paisley Underground thing and the sort of indie. I got really into all the C86 stuff like Shop Assistants and Tallulah Gosh and stuff through Calvin. But you know, we used to like just go over to Calvin's house and listen to his records. One thing is funny is like one of the ways that like kids my age like met Calvin is not through Be Happening or through Chaos. It's like because he volunteered to drive the Evergreen van that went from Evergreen to downtown. So like when the bus stopped running, you could take this Evergreen van and it was free.
Yeah.
And he was one of the drivers. So if you get really bored or if it starts raining, you just get on the bus and then like hang out with Calvin. So like, yeah, he was sort of like let us make tapes at his house or, you know, whatever.
I remember the first time going to Olympia, um, and going to like the record store that Judd from Sexvid worked at, and Calvin had made mixtapes that you could buy for sale, and I
Oh
bought a
yeah,
bunch
yeah.
of mixtapes, and they're amazing.
Yeah, yeah, so those are from his records, you know. He
Hmm.
had great records.
Hmm.
And I never like I'm not a record collector. I mean, I have like you can't see, but like over there's like thousands of records. But I don't really I'm not a record collector like Calvin. Like I didn't buy records in the 80s. I did probably had like 100 records and I lost most of them in Eugene. But you know, like when you I sold all my stuff one time, I lost a bunch of records another time, and then I moved to DC and I lost a bunch of records that time. So I don't really have any of my 80s records. I have like a handful, but not really too many. But you know, it was kind of like I was like, well, why would I buy that? Calvin has it, you know. Like
Hmm.
I could just tape it. Like I didn't have that kind of like I need to own it thing. It was like, oh, they have that at Chaos. Like I don't, you know, I could listen to that anytime I want. I don't have to buy it.
Well, it's also amazing how musically literate like the punk stuff coming out of Olympia after a certain point is, because there are all of these great records I guess people have access to, like you're saying, like being into the Vaselines, and you know eventually Sub Papa would reissue that and we'd all get to, you know, and then obviously Nirvana's covers too, but you know people would get to appreciate that. But like that was kind of obscure stuff back then, like even Shop Systems were kind of obscure.
Yeah, well, K distributed the 53rd and a third records.
Oh, they
So
did.
yeah,
Oh.
K had a distro that
Mhm.
they sold to stores. And actually when we would tour in the Go Team, which was my band with Calvin, we would bring, you know, records to sell in addition to our records and tapes and stuff. And so we would be destroying the Vaseline. You know, we'd just bring them to our shows and people could buy them. And you know how kids do that, like
Oh,
even
definitely.
like at punk shows where
I
you
have a
have.
lot of I have a lot of K. Like I think my Tribe 8 7 inch has a K distribution sticker on the back of the poly bag and stuff. So I got a
Yeah.
lot like Kay is such a like, and obviously we have that connection from Toronto with Shadowy Men later on, and I think Fifth Column too has that
Oh,
connection
for
obviously
sure.
too.
Yeah,
And
I put on a Shadowy Men show here, and I did such a bad job. I did nothing, and then they were here. They're like, "Oh, we have a show." I was like, "Oh, yeah, right, okay." But I called everyone up and was like, "You guys gotta come to the show." And then I forgot I was putting this show on. But uh, yeah, I'm not a good person to have book. I can book my own tour, but I'm not good at putting on other people's shows. But yeah, for sure, Gloria or GB Jones from Hyde and Fifth Column was, yeah, a big influence. And that was part of the radio shows. Like we wanted to play female artists, and we were looking for that. Like I remember the first hardcore record think I bought was like Blood on the Rock, which is like Rodney Binghamheimer's like compilation of hardcore bands. But I had a subscription to Flipside because I found Flipside was easier than Maximum Rock and Roll to like skim really quickly and be like which bands have girls in them, which is like basically what I was trying to do. Is like because they had more pictures, but then you could also go to like Rodney's playlist, and he played like a lot of bands with girls in it, like the Pandoras or Shona Knife, or I don't even know
mhm.
like what the examples are. But yeah, so we would play those bands like intentionally on the radio. Like I remember Conflict from Tucson. We had their record and we played that a lot. And then
That record rips. That record's awesome.
we had the Rex demo that had like the Punk Is Not an Attitude, but all the other songs I can't remember right now. And then we had like this record or a tape from Anti-Scrutiny Faction, like ASF from Boulder.
A
That was
7-inch. That's a pre-Tribe 8 band, right? I think.
yes, Leslie from Tribe 8 was in that band. And we played that, and obviously Sin 34 and Sato Nation, and the Ruggedy Anns from Canada. Do you know that band?
Yes.
The
Fantastic LP.
My Dolls from Houston, and Meat Joy from Austin. There was all these all girl bands, or not all girls, but like definitely a lot of that at Chaos, and we try to play it as it was coming out. We had that record live at the Deaf Club, I think it's called, that had like Pink Section and maybe like Inflatable Boy Clams. I can't remember if they're on that. But we had like White Pants. We had the White Pants record. Like we had all this crazy cool stuff out there, and we would just play it, and it sometimes you'd find something out there that was like, this has been here forever, but I've never heard anyone play it, and then you just start playing it. It was really fun.
Because of like, because you guys knew, or because you knew who Fifth Column were and they were an influence, were you aware of the band Curse from Toronto? They were a really obscure first wave punk band, but I always felt growing up that they had sort of a very similar energy to what you would be doing later on.
I got that CD in the late 90s when it came out, and
Mm.
I don't remember knowing about it before then. But it definitely, some label put out those CDs that like there was a Dish Rags and a Curse one, and I think there was maybe one other one like
Vile
that.
tones, other people's music.
Yeah, I didn't know. I don't think I knew about the Dish Rags, but I don't think I knew. The Young Canadians was a big band that we played on the radio too, but we like to play that song Hawaii, but you had to do the disclaimer of like, foul language or whatever.
Art
Yeah.
Bergman, that's like he's a poet laureate now in Canada
I
from the
don't
Young
know too
Canadians.
much about that scene. I just remember that single, like, because it's like it's about the rainy weather and you want to go somewhere sunny. It was a big anthem here. We played Flipper, of course, yeah, all that kind of stuff. The Calamities from France, we played that band, and the Pandoras, Red Cross, Desperate Teenage Love Dolls soundtrack. There was just like a lot of great records.
Did you brought him up earlier, but Poison Idea, when was the first time you saw them?
This is interesting because like I said, like with Beyond Possession, where I had like forgotten anything about them. I don't know if I've just forgotten that I've seen Poison Idea or what, but like I was going through these files. I was like, Poison Idea played this show. I was definitely at this show. Poison Idea played this show. I was definitely at this show. Poison Idea was at this show. I was definitely at this show. But I remember even like in the 90s and like being at like maybe we were opening for Sonic Youth or something, and like one of the guys from Poison Idea was outside and came to get Thurston and was like, blah 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 from Poison Idea, I think it was Pig or something like that, is here, like, can he come in? And Thurston was like, oh yeah, sure. And like we're talking to him, and I was like, I have no recollection of ever seeing this band. I was like, they must have only played like bars or something. That's not true. They played all these shows that I was at, and I just do not remember. And I'm like, and in my head, I was like, that's like kind of like that Portland scene that's like Satyricon, it's like over 21, and like it's just kind of like biker punk or something. Like it just wasn't my scene. Like, and I didn't know about it. And it came up recently, like in 2020, actually, where like Bikini Kill was practicing in Portland, and Kathleen's from there. And we were talking, and she's like, yeah, well, remember that time I like, oh, we're talking about the Satyricon, and she was saying that she used to go there. And I was like, did you have a fake ID because it was over 21? She's like, it wasn't. And I was like, it was. So we like looked it up, and there was a short time when it was all ages. And I was like, I didn't know that. And she's like, I fucking told you. Like, I was going there when I was a teenager. And I was just like, I just thought you had a fake ID or something. And then she's like, do you remember like when I went on tour with Poison ID? And I was like, no.
What?
And she was like, yeah, I went on tour with Fits of Depression, and they went on tour with Poison Idea, and I went on, I took all these pictures. And I was just like, you are full of surprises. Like, I was just like, no, I don't remember that. And I was like, I don't even remember, because I think of, like it's not that she doesn't know about punk. Like when I met her, she had a shaved head and like, definitely was in the punk scene. It was that whole myth where like I'm the punk and she's, the artist. That's just not true. But I do think, I was just surprised. I was like,
that's pretty capital P punk.
But then when I was like, I was looking at this, I was like, so I don't know. I don't know what it is about things that connect with you or don't at certain ages. I mean, maybe they just seemed like weird adults that were drunk and I didn't care, I kind of had like I went through like a lot of phases where I was like, I'm straight edge now, or I'm, into positive, like I really love 7 Seconds, like Better Youth Organization, and all the records that they put out, and I would mail order them, and I'd mail order the Discord stuff. And I liked melodic hardcore, and I liked melodic punk, like the Avengers is classic example of what I liked, or like DOA or something like that, and that kind of scary, like brutal kind of metal influence, like music, it didn't always connect with me. But I don't know what I was thinking. Like Poison Idea are clearly great. Like, I don't know. I missed that, I guess.
Maybe because they also had weird beef the whole way through with DC and Discord.
They never played Olympia. That I'm not going to say never, because I thought that they did. I didn't know that I'd seen them in Tacoma or Guerrilla Gardens or whatever. But there was also that whole era of like after the Tropicana, I was pretty cynical and burnt out on a lot of hardcore. Like I remember just being like seeing the Dehumanizers all the time, and like no offense to people who like the Dehumanizers or whatever, but like, how many times can you see this? And then when Bikini Kill first started, like that was 1990, and I had this thing where I was just like, are you fucking kidding me? There's still kids in hardcore bands. Like, why? Like, are we going to do this forever? You know what I mean? And just being like scratching in my head, like, and now, as we know, we are going to do it forever. And it's not necessarily bad, right? It's more inclusive. But like it's triggering sometimes when I see it coming back, because I'm like, even when Sex Fed came back, I was like, oh my God, it's like Riot Grrrl never happened. It's like there's never been a whole scene that was, women on all the bills, or whatever. It's like, do we have to struggle every time to like get, and it's not, I do want to recognize all the women who are involved in hardcore, like including myself, like as an active creator and participant in the punk scene. Then, I don't want to perpetuate that idea that women weren't around or girls weren't around in hardcore. Like we were there, we were there the whole time. But at the same time, it was very different. It was very different. It's different now. It's very different now. It's not as male dominated. And, when I see it coming back, sometimes I get like, I don't know, just like pissed off or something.
But
oh no, it's okay. I just wanted to get to the point where like, yeah, so like in the early 90s, like I wrote the song, like that was kind of like an anti-hardcore song in Bikini Kill. And it was directed towards like the kids that grew up to be in Unwound and stuff, basically. And I was just like, dude, no more of this, you gotta find something more interesting to do with your life. Like, but then like a couple years later, just 94. I was like making an issue of Jigsaw, and it was like, during the like after the corporate takeover of alternative music and stuff. And I'm like sitting there writing about Born Against, and I'm sitting there writing about Gravity Records, and I'm sitting there like interviewing Tony Joy and all the shit. And I got fucking back into it. Like I was into it, like not even like and all those bands are guys too, But I can tell you this, that I think what brought me back to hardcore that time was the drumming of Brooks Headley, who I think is like one of the most incredible drummers in the history of punk music. And definitely one of my favorite hardcore drummers. Like to see him play in Born Against and to see him play in UOA and like, then later like Wrangler Brutes and Skull Control and all of the bands that he was in, like he's just incredible. He's incredible. So, I think it's the drumming that always gets me, really.
I think it's also fascinating to kind of look at, different periods in hardcore, like the 85 period. And I think it happens a little bit less later in the Pacific Northwest, but like seems like such a drop off point where people just got bored with the form or the way the form was going.
And all the rules too of like what's punk and what's not punk. And I feel like as much as I'd love to say I love so much about Maximum Rock and Roll, it always drove me crazy too, because it's like they're always like, this is what punk is, and this is only what punk is, and anything outside of that is not punk. And it was just like, are you kidding me? Like you're not gonna review the Joey Cassio single because it's a synthesizer. Like Joey Cassio is a punk band, or whatever, like even in the like 2007, I was getting annoyed at them. But like that rigid sort of rules of like what's punk and what's not punk. I don't like that aspect of hardcore.
Well, I love it because I think we all, it's like I guess Christian people and Jesus in a way that we all have different relationships to this word, right? Like, and one person's definition is not going to be the same as another person's definition, and they're all valid
Oh,
because
for sure.
they're but at the same time, like I find it, yeah, like I find it's interesting at different points where I could see why people got bored. Like, what were the bands that these kids that were into the Boston music, what bands were they kind of gravitating towards locally? Was it
Oh,
Dehumanizers
locally?
or
Um,
AQOA or whatever they were called? Or
they would just go to any of the shows that were kind of generic, I'm saying generic as a negative, just sort of like if it was like a guys like kind of like thrashy band,
yeah,
but everyone would come to those like. And I was into skateboarding, so I loved JFA. I remember my parents like took me on vacation, and I was like, we have to come back in time for this show. And my dad was the whole vacation, he was like, we might make it back, but we might not. And you need to be prepared to like maybe miss the show. And I was just like the entire time just put my Walkman on, it like listening to the new Dag Nasty record the entire time. I was like, I hate my dad, I hate my dad, I hate my dad. Now whenever I hear like Can I Say by or whatever, is that what's called? A Dag
yeah,
Nasty record, I just go back into the like, oh my dad's. And then we got there in time for JFA, and then like someone fucking broke the window of the Tropicana, and they only play like 8 songs. But that cover of like the JFA live album was taken right outside the Tropicana. So like, when you're talking about the record store in Olympia, like Phantom City that Judd from Sex Vid did, like that's where that photo is taken. So I don't know. There's
it,
like, all that stuff you remember in your head.
well, it's interesting with Sex Fit because I know you're saying like it's like Riot Girl never happened, but they were 100% an elf growth of Riot Girl. Like Judd managing the gossip beforehand, Sue obviously being a fan of this
Yes, yes,
stuff,
yes. I mean, yes, 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 yes. I know. And they're not the enemy, But like then when Gag came around, I was like the same. I was like,
yeah,
oh my God, like another. And these bands are great. Like Gag are great. And I love Adam from Gag or whatever, AFG as he's affectionately known. But and Judd was hilarious and stuff. But like, yeah, it's triggering, I guess.
mm.
You want things to move on.
it,
Um,
it
yeah.
also that Milk Music and Gun Outfit kind of wave afterwards. I thought was great too of stuff that was coming
Yeah,
out.
and I really like Sun Skull too.
Mm.
Like Marion Hayes's band, and then of course, like with Olympia, like we got fucking Vex, like, and they're like one of the best punk bands I have seen in my entire life. Like, I really do miss that, but we go through eras here. Like right now, we have Electric Chair, and they've been around for a while, but they didn't break up, and they're really good.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's like a million other bands that I haven't seen because of COVID and stuff. We have like a band, this funny band called the Gobs that are kind of like the Spits, but different.
What what about like Brotherhood and Resolution and those kind of bands? Were you into
Brotherhood
those?
was like Greg Anderson, right?
Yeah,
The Fall Liberty.
and Nate
Yes.
from Foo Fighters was in the very early lineup.
Oh yeah, he was in Diddley Squat. Is that right?
Diddley Squat, absolutely. And
Yeah.
then
So
Galleon's Lap.
Galleon's Lap. So there was a little bit when Nation of Ulysses came out here, the first tour, they were playing with some of those bands, and some of the girls that later started Riot Grrrl and Olympia were part of that straight edge Seattle, Tacoma, Belfair, Gig Harbor scene. I think Oak Harbor. I don't know. The Accused are from Oak Harbor. Um, that's like where Donna Dresch is from. Well, she's a Navy brat, but she was in the Tropicana scene too. She was in an all girls band called the Borman. Oh yeah, I want to say the bands that were all girls from the Tropicana. There was the Borman, there were Tacoma, Olympia, and then there was Rain Shadow, and then there was Flowers for Funerals. That was a mixed gender. I don't know. There weren't very many, but there were a few.
Did any of these bands record? Like obviously maybe not records, but even like demos?
I think that you would most likely be able to hear a tape of any of those bands if they played live on Chaos.
Hmm.
And people would play live on our radio shows, and then we would tape it, and then they would get played. But sometimes they would come out. I feel like the Flowers for Funerals one did come out. They were kind of like a proto Riot Grrrl band. Fright Wig we saw a lot.
They're a
Not
band.
in Olympia, but yeah, they were very influential. We saw them in Tacoma and Seattle.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but they're a band that I really have only begun to appreciate the impact of through doing this podcast. Like hugely important band, and a band that's like I can't believe there hasn't been like a reissue campaign or some sort of like someone writing a great article about them, because like everyone from like yourself to like Margaret Cho to like the Melvins guys, like everyone talks about how great this band was.
They were incredible, 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 incredible. So good. And they were really funny too. Yeah. And scary. They had that kind of horror. They were like Flipper, but girls, they
Hmm.
were really great.
Hmm.
And they had different lineups too. I remember seeing Husker Du a lot in Seattle, and then like one time seeing that Soul Asylum open for Husker Du and being like, you guys, I think Soul Asylum just blew Husker Du off the stage. And people were like, how is that possible? I was like, I'm telling you, I saw it. And for years I tell that story, and people are like, really? Soul Asylum? I was like, anyone who was at that show, I think it was like maybe Soundgarden's first show too, maybe. I think Husker Du played twice that day or something. And one of them was with it was at Guerrilla Gardens. One of them was with Soul Asylum, and it was incredible. I don't know if anyone has said that on your podcast, but
Well,
I do
Dave,
remember like 85 or something. They're incredible.
yeah, actually, Sarush Alvi, who started Vice, talked about how they were one of the greatest bands he ever saw in his life, and they were actually his neighbors for a while. Dave Perner
And
from
they could
Soul.
sing too, which is
Yeah,
like, like really sing and be that loud. Like that's hard to do.
yeah, and it's got like I don't know, it's just got like when you see those bands that just have that kind of thing where you're like, you've got that pop star quality to it. I could see why you'd be like, oh, this band's gonna get somewhere with this thing.
Yeah, and like a lot of the opinions I have, like people who are record collectors later are like, really, that's like the band that was great. It's like, yeah, like the Screaming Trees, I will say right now, probably the best band that I've ever seen in my life. Like their and their first two shows. Like I'm like, I don't know like what is better than that, And some of that stuff, it just sticks in your head. Like it was like seeing the Stooges or something. It was like this band's never played a show before, and this is how good they are. Like it's mind-blowing.
Was the music kind of like the stuff that would come out on SST early on, or like what was the vibe of the stuff they were doing back then? Was like were they more of a punk band or more Stooges kind of vibed?
It was more 60s psychedelic, but kind of garagey, like 60s style, but with the ferocity of like a Stooges kind of all out, just going insane. Like Gary Lee Conner went insane. Like he was like all of a sudden he was like Pete Townsend, you know, like, and it was like we were watching The Who or something. And, you know, The Who are like, were my first favorite band and stuff. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was incredible. The drummer was great. The singer was great. They went ape shit. It was just a wall of sound. And it was, you know, it was before the SST record, but not that long before.
Well, that's what I love about, your taste in music is because like I talked to other people in Seattle, like particularly people that are more from that brotherhood scene, and they didn't mess with a lot of that more rock kind of stuff, but like you seem to be, I guess what is it, Catholic enough in your taste that you like all this kind of stuff that's like that I love, that it all fits under the punk umbrella to me too. But like were there other people that would be going to say like one of these more hardcore shows later on? I mean, like Dillian's Galleon's Lap, Dilly Squat kind of era type shows that were also going to these sort of more grunge shows. Like, was there a lot of crossover between these like little micro scenes?
I'm gonna say like that the crossover would have been the Riot Grrrl bands, or what are now called the Riot Grrrl bands. Like we would play at Party Hall with some of those bands because we knew them through. I mean, I think Nation of Ulysses came out in 1990 or something, and I had met those guys on Go Team tour. Like I'd met several of them, and we were pen pals. And you know, I'd met Fugazi when they were out here and stuff. So knew about Nation of Ulysses, completely obsessed with them. And when they came out here, they played with, I don't know, I feel like I saw Brotherhood and Galleon's Lip at playing with Nation of Ulysses. And then we played some of those shows the next summer they came out. I don't know, maybe at the Party Hall. And, you know, like I remember the guys from Galleon's Let, like this guy, I think Lenny was their guitar player. He was screening Rites of Spring shirts. And that's when I had my fanzine Jigsaw, and I was still writing about, you know, DC hardcore. And even in 1989 and 1990, you know, like I was still writing about records that came out like super, because I was that into it, you know.
Yeah.
I really loved that scene. And, you know, of course, Faith Void and all that shit too.
Well,
Bad Brains was, like, in my opinion, probably the best hardcore band. I mean, I don't know who was better than that. But, you know, they're from DC, but obviously also existed in the New York era.
was there like because like I find Bikini Kill winds up being this band that does connect a lot of these sort of like really disparate worlds. Like you're playing shows with Rancid at the same time that you're on an Ebullition Records comp. At the same time, there's this connection of Born Against. You know, it just feels like you're saying, like you're this band that like obviously burst this incredible revolution scene in your wake, but also at the same time is part of like every little subsect of punk pre Green Day kind of exploding and everything kind of I guess changing again.
Yeah, I mean we did all kinds of stuff. That's true. I remember one of the first places we played was Gilman, you know, on the first times we left Olympia, anyways, is what I'm saying, on Bikini Kill tour. And like, yeah, I remember immediately just connecting with like Blatz and you know, Jack Acid and Tribe 8. And I was just like, oh man, punk is still really happening here, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
like in the way that I can relate to, you know.
That became like the all ages capital of punk. It feels like in the '90s, like San Francisco, with the Gilman there and with all these distribution and labels there, and just all these once again little scenes on top of each other. Like it really did feel like so much energy coming out of that place. Like that's where I wanted to move when I was growing up.
Yeah, and I guess probably because I'm such a like a staunch all ages person. Like, I mean, even now, like I'm in a band that plays bars, but it's not my band. I'm just the drummer. But like, you know, if it's like if I'm in a band, like we try to play all ages shows
Mm.
as a matter of principle, because, you know, I don't believe it's right to discriminate on the basis of age. I don't believe that my life would have been the same if bands would have, like, I'm still mad at Dinosaur Jr. for not playing all ages, you know, in Olympia or in the Northwest. Like I could never go see them. I mean, I actually saw them like just recently because I was still mad. But, you know, I don't even really, I try not to, like, obviously I go to bar shows now, but like I kind of try not to. So like that might be the connection, is like, you know, we were looking for all ages shows. Like when I was booking the Bikini Kill tours, I booked most of them, not all of them, but, you know, and obviously we were a collective, so that other people in the band helped and stuff. But yeah, we would meet people who were playing all ages shows. So Nation of Ulysses, you know, Fugazi, Born Against, Gilman people, Jabberjaw in LA, they had that going on. But you know, like and what you're saying, like in Seattle, like we didn't play bars, and Bikini Kill didn't play bars in Seattle. We played Velvet Elvis, we played Party Hall, we played OK Hotel. You know, we didn't play like the Central Tavern or anything.
Experiencing Bikini Kill kind of in real time as a fan up here, it felt like it was important right away, you know, to people obviously, but also just in like the history of music. Like it was almost immediate. Like these were like sort of essential records to get. As much as there was, I'm sure you also experienced there was like a backlash to it from a lot of people as well. But did you get a sense of that about how important this thing was almost immediately from getting out there and playing? Like, did it feel different than playing in Go Team and Velvet Sidewalk and these type of things?
Oh, definitely. But you know, I think like it was possibly self-importance. Like we actually took what we were doing very seriously. You know, which, you know, I have a sense of humor about it now. And Kathleen's actually like very funny person. But
I bought a
yeah,
cameo from her for my wife's for Mother's Day for my wife, and it was very funny.
yeah, she's hilarious. But you know, it's not to say that we didn't have a sense of humor, but
Yeah.
we did take what we were doing very seriously. And you know, it was the entire point of all of our lives. It wasn't like we were halfway doing a band. We were like, no, this is our band. We're the best band that's ever existed or ever going to exist. You know, like it was just very much like this is the most important thing. Everyone pay attention to it. And that rubs people the wrong way or whatever. But it's like, I'm sorry, like if you're in the Clash or you're in the Ramones or you're in, you know, whatever, Poison Idea or the Crucifix or something, like Butthole Surfers, like it's not your side thing, it's your life. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? And that's how we were about it. So I think that we took it seriously, you know, and then, you know, other people did or did not. But yeah, we certainly did.
You kind of have to make impact. Like it's like Black Flag thought they were the greatest band in the world. Like there's a you need to kind of like feel that you're going to do something important to kind of give it meaning in the beginning. You know,
Yeah.
at least like slog through it.
But like to answer your question too, like, you know, I've been in a lot of bands and I don't feel that way about the other bands. You know, I
Mm.
didn't everything was lining up. Everything was lining up like musically, aesthetically, in terms of like the time and place, like the people. Yeah, it felt like it was one of those things. It was like I was in school and it was like, oh, okay. Yeah, of course I'm quitting school. Like, yeah, okay. Of course I'm gonna move where you guys are moving. You know, it was like, oh yeah, boyfriend, who cares? You know what I mean? It was just like, no, this is my life. Job, I don't know. Like, I'll get money somehow.
Well, yeah, because there's like a
Future, who knows? I mean, I'm kind of still like that, you know. We're doing the band again. Okay. I'm all in.
but it does you know, and obviously the impact that you have is such that there is you know, it changes everything. You know, like bands, you know, even bands that rejected you were changed in your wake. You know, like the it was like a monumental shift, like you're saying, like the Clash. You know, like there's certain bands that just nothing's the same afterwards, and Bikini Kill is one of those bands that like punk is. You know, like you're saying, like at times it might feel like Bikini Kill never happened or Riot Girl never happened, but at the same time, like it has, and everything is just never going to be what it was if it hadn't happened.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, I think that's probably true. I mean, it's hard to be objective, right? But sometimes you just feel like, you know, like it's not all about us. It's like we were maybe the most celebrated of all these things, or the most like, you know, because Riot Girl gets a lot of historical credit and a lot of criticism, well-deserved criticism as well. But you know, there's been feminist punk has existed for as long as punk has existed. Women have been around from the beginning. Like Alice Bag was there, you know, Lorna Doom was there, you know, Holly
Patti
Stein
Smith.
was there, Patti Smith, Debbie Harry, and the list goes on and on. Like from the birth of rock and roll, right? You know, so it's not just one band. It was going to happen anyway, you know.
It was, but I think it's I don't know, it's just something about the way it was presented and maybe it's because like you're saying, there was feminist punk, like China's Kaminas from Seattle. Like they were a feminist punk band, and they're part of the first wave. But I don't know, it's just like the way it was presented, the unapologetic nature of it, like the manifestos. Like it just feels like you look at what came out of '90s punk rock that's actually important and actually had an impact on a political level, and it's like Riot Girl and some of the stuff going on in DC, and then some of that hardline stuff maybe from the negative side of things, but like really it changed punk forever. And I wanted to ask you about this because like obviously men having power taken away from them will always be threatening to men. But at the same time, like the level of vitriol that you kind of experienced, I guess, from the punk scene. Was that shocking to you at a certain level when that started coming a
Oh
little bit
yeah,
later
for
on?
sure, for sure, for sure. It was really fucking weird, I was like, I remember one time, like the first time we went to LA, which was like in late 92, was right when our first EP came out, but we'd been a band for a couple years and lived in DC for a year and played around New York and, all that kind of stuff. And like we got to LA and I don't know, we were tired. It was a dramatic tour. And somebody from Flipside was there and they wanted to interview us. And someone was like, "Oh, do you want to do this interview?" And we're just like, "No, not, no, we're not gonna do that. Maybe tomorrow or whatever." And so we didn't do this thing. Someone was there to interview us. We didn't, I don't know, maybe it was planned. I don't remember. We just didn't do it. And then like Flipside came out and it was like, it told us, it said, Bikini Kill, fuck you. And it said, fuck you, like 27 times. Like I remember counting like how many times they said fuck you. And I was like, this is a magazine that I subscribed to for like 7 years or something.
Yeah.
I read it faithfully. I was like, oh, of course I want to be in this magazine, like, and I was like, I don't know, not to bring up Courtney Love, but like she was on the cover of Flipside, and they had like a lot of women on the cover of Flipside. And I was like, so what is it about us that just pisses these people off, And then also like there's a little bit later, like NoFX had a song like that where they were like, fuck you, Kathleen Hanna or something like that. And that whole thing was so weird too, because I was like, the only thing that I can think of that might have been about is like we played a show with NoFX in Hawaii, and this was pretty late, like 95 or something. I don't know when that song came out, but like we played a show in Hawaii. It was our second time we'd been to Hawaii, and we were kind of big in Hawaii. And like we played one show headlining, and then the other show we were opening for NoFX, which I mean, I kind of remember them, but I didn't remember that much about them. So we played this big show, and like this is how we did things. And so we're like, well, this show costs $15. If we would, or something like that. It's like if we were gonna headline, we could probably draw this many people and people would pay this much. So like basically, like I don't remember what they wanted. Maybe they were going to give us like a small amount of money at the end of the night or something. And I was like, so here's your guarantee is like $250 or something like that. I was like, oh, we should probably make 1,000 or 1,500 or something. Like we would just ask for what we thought we were worth. So we like hung out with NoFX all night. And me and Kathleen had this plan. We're gonna like make friends with them and then like go to talk to them about the split and be like, what do you think about giving us like $700 more something, like some ridiculous amount, like we think we deserve, 3 times as much as what. And then, they were business people. So they're like, fuck you, like, no, like you agreed to play the show for $300 or blah, 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 blah. Or like, well, we did because we didn't really have a choice. Cause like we happened to be here on this day and you guys were already playing. So, 2 shows just got combined and like, whatever, like they gave us the money. They did. They gave us the money that we asked for, but I guess it pissed them off because then they wrote this fuck you song to us. And, it kind of really just, I have this picture of like Kathleen and NoFX doing like a human pyramid. Like they're just, we were goofing around or whatever.
Yeah.
But maybe they knew that we were like, oh, just being nice to them because we're going to ask for more money. You know what I mean? But that's how you do shit. Like, especially if you feel like, I mean, they can say no, and then maybe we would have wrote a fuck you, NoFX song, but like, probably not. We probably just would have been like, yeah, well, we tried.
Well, I just interviewed Chris Estrada, who's a very funny comedian from LA who does the show This Fool that's on Hulu now. Very funny TV show, but total hardcore kid. And he said that when that No Effects record came out, he looked at it as them calling fans to pick a side, and he said, "Well, fuck you, No Effects. I like Bikini Kill," and got it to No Effects. So it backfired on a lot of people. I mean,
it was they weren't really my thing, to be honest, and we probably weren't their thing. But there's whatever. There doesn't need to be like a big war about it.
No, and also if you want to hear amazing conversations, ask Fat Mike about the Melvins and ask Buzz about No Effects, because they have no love lost for each other at all.
Yeah, I mean, I've known Buzz since I was 14 years old, and he has his opinions, and I don't always share them, but I do have ultimate respect for Buzz Osborne, like especially just like the way he does his band, like and I can't even think of like what thing I'm saying that I don't share his opinion. We probably disagree on the Mentors, let's just say that. Like we probably have musical differences, but we also like a lot of the same shit. And Buzz is so great because like the Melvins would always like get put in Olympia with these like heavy bands, and at one point he's like, hey, do you think the Go Team would want to open for us, or do you think Bratmobile would want to open for us? He doesn't want to play with bands that sound just like him. He's into like weird, cool shit that people are doing. Like he let me play like a song of me just singing and playing guitar, like in front of, right, opening for the Melvins during like the grunge era when everyone just wanted like to see Tad, and I'm just like, la, 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 la. And he's like, hey, that was great.
They also do a Bikini Kill cover now, right? So
they do, yeah. And and Buzz has been very supportive of the reunion too. Yeah, I mean, those guys are great, and Dale is like probably the best drummer ever, right?
The most punk ever. I have talked to you forever, and unfortunately, I have to call into a radio show now myself. Tobi, I would continue this for another hour and a half, 2 hours. Will you please come back on the show anytime?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Anytime.
I probably forget like 20 things that I was going to say, but
I still have sheets of questions left to ask you, because it's lived up to all my expectations and exceeded them. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for everything you've done.
Oh yeah, you too. I've enjoyed listening to the show.
All right, we had to pause for a second there because I had to call not just any radio show. I had to call the best show with, of course, Tom and John. Shout out to John Worster, of course, who had a birthday very recently. If you're listening to this episode when it came out, friend of the show, John Worster, and then we resumed. Tobi, thank you for coming back to the show.
Oh yeah.
I realized very quickly after we got off the phone that there were so many more questions I had to ask you about that rather than just put this out as is, I would love to invite you back, and you very graciously agreed to do it. So one thing that happened since we last spoke, though, is I fucked up played 2 kind of DIY punk shows in Toronto, and we played with like a lot of younger bands. And watching these bands, it kind of struck me at how just kind of like broad the tastes everyone has now is. Like, these were kids that like 1 second would be moshing to a Cro-Mags cover, another second, it'd be a Nirvana song, another second would be like, some crazy obscure Japanese hardcore cover. It really felt like there's just sort of like this sort of breaking down of walls.
What do you think? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I just wondered, like, actually, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you, because I feel like it started with my generation, at least in the access to information in terms of finding out about punk all over the world. But I think I was wondering about yourself, like, where did that impetus to kind of like find out about punk from different places come from? Because there's a lot of people that were just kind of content to look at their local scene, or at least the immediate scenes around them. But it seemed like you were, one of those rare people that was like looking for punk from every place. Like, were you aware of international punk early on, or what point did you become aware of that stuff?
Not as much. I mean, like I said, I think before that we were, my friend Donna Dresch and I were like writing to GB Jones, and that's Toronto, right?
Yeah, that's Toronto. Absolutely.
I thought so. It's hard to remember that far back. So like, we knew there was bands up there. I knew about like that band. I think I mentioned before, the Ruggedy Anns. They're from Canada, right?
Yeah, I think they're from Vancouver or Calgary, maybe Vancouver.
I don't think they're Vancouver.
Must be Calgary then.
I would probably have remembered that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so some Canadian bands, I don't know, probably I think there are some like compilations like that Maximum Rock and Roll put out and like I knew about Raw Power. I think I saw Raw Power, but like I can't be totally sure because it's one of those like Melvin's shows at Guerrilla Gardens where you're like I don't know. Like I feel like I went to every one, but there's no way that I went to every one because I couldn't even drive yet. So it all just was like a blur. The Calamities I definitely knew about in Shonen Knife, and that was that those bands were from listening to Calvin's radio show. I heard them, and also like Kay put out the first Shonen Knife tape, right? Be Happening had gone to Japan, so we knew like a few bands. There's a band called Kaya, I think, from Japan. There was like an all-girl kind of hardcore punk band.
Yeah, there's like that comes from Japan. Or like there's such an incredible history of Japanese punk. Like that's one place that I've always been, just amazed at how much stuff I don't know about that came out of from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely no expert. I think the kids who got into hardcore, 80s hardcore, like after the internet and stuff, and eBay and all that, I think it got really obsessive, or maybe even just like the what are those compilations called?
The
Killed by
Beast,
Death. Like,
Kill by Death. Yeah,
yeah, all those, just like all that stuff. Like I kind of every time I was working at Kill Rock Stars doing mail order, and every time I'd like realize there's another one, I was like, oh my God, this is gonna go on forever. So many.
I think that's one of the really fascinating things about punk is because it feels like right out of the gate there was this real navel gazing going on with it, where like this real sort of self obsession with what punk itself was, and I think that Kill by Death thing is ultimately the peak of that sort of need to be archaeologists within your own genre.
Yeah, and I think I talked about this in another interview, not the one I did with you, but the yeah, like at some point I remember in the 80s, like getting into like 60s garage bands and then having this thought, when I was getting on like the Pebbles and the Nuggets compilations and going to thrift stores and like digging through like the cultural trash that was like very affordable at the time, like Seeds records or whatever, and the Music Machine or whatever that stuff was. And then being like, I wonder if in the future there's going to be like a kids that will like obsess over like garage band, like hardcore bands like that are happening in people's like garages and living rooms and stuff. And I was like, no, probably not, because nobody's making any recordings and no one would probably ever know about these bands, but it definitely happened.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
yeah, I do. When it started happening, I was like, oh God, this is really weird. That's
But
just like what getting old is about. But it's also, who could have predicted, like the internet and the diffusion of all of the information and all that kind of stuff.
well, I think even more incredible is who would have predicted back then that this stuff would not only be the realm of record collectors, but also just the realm of mainstream music history. Like the stuff that was coming out of the scene, stuff you're doing included, obviously, is changing like all music history in its way. Like these garage bands on Nuggets and Pebbles, they're just ripples in music.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it, but yeah, I mean, it's really like when people ask me about like Riot Girl stuff or whatever, like it's very hard for me to even like understand it because I still feel like even just like the relationship between like the band Bikini Kill and then like what is called Riot Girl, which now all of that is sort of conflated into one thing. But at one time they were kind of separate. But like it's even hard for me to understand or to talk about, like when someone asks me to do an interview about that, like it's really hard for me to speak about it. Like I just have to speak to my experience, and my experience is so different than what people would think my experience and opinions are, that then I kind of end up like arguing a little bit, or like being a little like, well, it wasn't actually really, well, that's not how we think of it. And then people are like, but that's how it was. I'm like, not really, but like that, even that is hard to talk about. But then like also like how that has gone on and continued and then like been filtered through the media and then traveled around the world and everything, like people are like, well, what about that? I'm like, I don't even know about that. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. Like I guess there's today even like Riot Girl kind of influence in Mexico City and South America, and definitely there was in Indonesia in like the late 90s, early 2000s, just stuff like that where you're just like, I really can't speak to any of that. I have no idea like what that even means really.
Well, I was in Japan a couple years ago making this TV show about wrestling, and I saw a band in Japan do a Bikini Kill cover. Like it is something that Yeah, it went around the world. And that's punk has always been kind of international, but I think, like you're saying, the reverberations of this thing where it, comes from kind of from the pages of what you're doing, and eventually becomes something that the whole world takes hold of. Much in the same way with punk or straight edge, like all these things eventually have very little relationship, or maybe they do have a relationship to the people that
Uh,
created them.
oh yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, I think the most similar thing is probably like straight edge or emo or something, because it's like it's still punk, but it's like, within punk, it's like another sort of like a subculture or whatever. And yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, I'm sure like everyone knows, like if you talk to Ian MacKaye, like he doesn't have, he doesn't have the same perspective that like a teenager would have on straight edge, but you're Ian MacKaye, like, that kind of thing.
Well, and I think that's the other thing that happens in punk is you eventually just put these people up on pedestals. These people become deified in a way because they are providing you with a moral code or a way of understanding the world in the way religion has for other people in other
Yeah, so you
places.
have that kind of orthodoxy element to it, and you have that kind of like, like if you're, it's kind of like for Riot in particular, I think it was kind of a problem in a way because like Kathleen is so incredibly charismatic and she's such a powerful performer, and she's kind of a natural communicator. But at the same time, like she wasn't trying to be like, everyone do what I say and, dress like me and do things exactly like, I'm doing them. Like that wasn't the idea at all. It was like, no, people should like, girls should create their own, culture of whatever that is, like however they want to do it, wherever they live. It wasn't like, oh yeah, just do a band just and sound exactly like Kathleen or, whatever. So that definitely is a part of why it was so strange. Like, and then of course she became like such a huge well-known feminist artist, like to go on to do all the other stuff.
Well, I think yourself too, right? Like people take things that you said and things that you wrote, and it's stuff that you're writing as like a teenager in some cases, and people take it like gospel. But fortunately, it's nothing that I don't think you have to regret. But it,
I
it
mean,
is.
I really honestly try not to think about it too hard. It's like, that's one thing that like really is true is like what people, okay, so now like, I mean, I'm 53 years old, so you're an adult, we're adults, and we're still doing this punk thing. Like, one of the framing devices for talking about stuff like Riot Grrrl is like, you have to understand, like, these are very young people. Like, like this was youth culture. And, in talking to you about this stuff, it was interesting because I think like, obviously like my parents lived through like the birth of rock and roll, then like that whole Sonics, Northwest garage scene, then, the hippie thing, right? Rock festivals and all that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
then we did the Back to the Land thing, and then punk. And they were still like, barely 30, right? And all that stuff happened in their life. And so then like I'm a teenager and I started experiencing like hardcore punk. And so it's like when we started our, the next thing, like you're like, okay, now that's over. Now we're gonna go try to do something else, or like indie pop, or whatever the K record scene was, or something like that, or and then like what later became Riot Grrrl or whatever. It's like, you just kept thinking that it was going to evolve, but also with each generation, like, there would be new things. Like it was very much like, oh yeah, let's just start the next thing. Like, but now it doesn't feel to me like it in that same way that those, music subcultures are so tied to like young people in the same way. Because like all the hardcore kids, like, they were just like kids that skateboarded, and, most people were under 21, some of the bands were in their 20s. It was like weird if someone was older than that, right? And it was even in Bikini Kill, it was like that. It was like, oh my God, we're 25. Like, we're still doing this, like, this is weird. Because our fans were like, or whatever fans, like the kids who are coming to see us, because we always did all ages, they were literally getting younger each year. They started out where we were kind of maybe the same age, and like we started getting older and they started getting younger. I was like, there's like 12-year-olds here, and it was just like, now I'm gonna be 27. Like, can you be in a band when you're like 27 years old? Like a punk band, it made no sense to me. Like, but yeah, so you have to really realize these are very young people. So it's like, if Kathleen was probably she's, well, we're about the same, we're like a year apart. So I'll say me, Kathleen and Kathy and I were like probably like the oldest people. Allison Wolf is our age, and then like the other people in Brownfield a little bit younger, and then Heavens to Betsy were in like high school, and then a lot of the kids who are making zines and like coming to the shows and stuff were teenagers, and it was like to get real about it, like because there was like a lot of stuff about like sexual violence and child abuse and that kind of thing. Like there was no separation. Like this stuff was happening to these kids, like at home, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
was very much like a survivor kind of like network at the, while it was happening.
Yeah, it's one of those things that becomes kind of bigger than punk rock in a way. Like I think at this point, for a lot of people, Riot Girl is far bigger than just a punk rock thing.
Um, I mean, because you have like feminism, then you have punk, and also like that, to be very clear, like there's a legacy, like as we talked about before, of feminism within punk. But just like anything, like punk can be racist and it can be anti-racist. Punk can be feminist and it can be anti-feminist, and it's the same is true for rock and roll, right? So you have a lot of that stuff going on all the time, like even now.
Yeah, no, I think there's like like looking behind you, I see like a Pussy Riot poster, and I think
Yeah.
that's an example of where this thing has become uh, kind of like bigger than just a music thing. Like, and it's
Oh,
become
for sure.
like what I'm saying. Like, it's like a way for young people to take control of their politics. I think. Well, like once again, looking as an outsider at it.
Yeah, and some people didn't survive. There was kids that like tried to run away, got on drugs, had to go back home and ended up, like not making it at a very young ages. Like our friend Molly 16, she just ended up back in a bad situation and she ended her life at 19. And she's like in the like all the Riot Girl pictures and stuff. So
I'm so sorry.
it's like a very real thing that happened.
Mm-hmm. Um, not to shift gears too harshly, but you were talking about earlier how it's part of a continuum of punk rock. And a couple of years ago, I bought Carolyn from Fifth Columns, like I'm sure just the remnants of her zine collection
Oh, nice.
from through a record store, and it was amazing finding like letters from Allison tucked into copies of fanzines and some of your fanzines, and finding letters from Kathleen kind of scrawled on the cover of Girl Germs and stuff. Like it just felt like it felt like there was sort of this continuation of this work that had been done prior to, but also, once again through, the band being so great, or just circumstance, or a combination, obviously, of everything, it was brought to like a much larger audience.
Um, yeah, and that brings up this whole idea too of like when you put yourself back in that mindset, like, and you talk about the fanzine network that we were a part of, like there was that whole queer zine stuff that was going on before Jigsaw that my fanzine was very much inspired by, and then so there's like a whole bunch of stuff going on right there, but there's one thing that I think is interesting is like I don't know if people like today like really realize how much that was just all about like information sharing. Like it wasn't like we were making fanzines like as an aesthetic exercise, like how they are exist now. It was like music didn't get written about or shared, in hardly any other way except for through the mail and through touring bands and through writing letters and through, kids making fanzines and writing about them and documenting it. So I don't know. I think I really, I go to Zine Fest sometimes and I'm like, do you have any music fanzines? I walk around to all the tables and almost always like they say no. And I'm like, I know there are music fanzines, but there's like, less and less. And I think I think we as a culture, like to have a healthy, like independent music culture need to be creating that. Because, the internet is like great, but like in a lot of ways, but there's like still it's such a corporate dominated regime, like especially with social media.
Well, it's interesting to kind of look at it also outside of music fanzines, like looking more at the personal fanzines, the political fanzines, as how it kind of pre-foretells social media, and was like like you're saying, like but in a completely non-corporate way, because you were just ripping off Kinkos to get those photocopies at the end of the day most of the time anyway.
Yeah, or somebody's work or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Your school or,
But
yeah.
to share your feelings, to share your ideology, to share your voice, like in a time when, yeah, like you're saying, these things weren't just aesthetic exercises; these were vital ways to communicate with people.
Yeah, and it was really hard to find out about, like, part of what we were trying to do with Bikini Kill is like it was really hard to find out about not just like current bands with girls and women in them, but like I didn't know, like maybe I mentioned this before, I can't remember, but like I didn't know that X-ray specs existed until I was like 20 years old. And like to me that's just like baffling now because like as I said, I knew about the Sex Pistols as a child and like my parents had all these records and I read stuff obsessively and I worked at a radio station and like somehow like I think it was when I moved to Eugene when I was like 18. Calvin gave me some records and I was like, what the hell is this one? And he's like, oh, X-ray Fix, you don't know about this one? It must have got stolen at Chaos or something. And I was like, and it just like blew my mind. I'm like, this, and then the fact that I didn't know about it, I was like, how is this kept a secret? And so I would just like, I would just write people letters and like, do you know about this record? I will tape it for you, like that kind of thing. Like, and that's sort of like what we did with each other and with our friends, like at first. And that was sort of what my fanzine was about. Like, it was only for like a few people, like, so I could have something to send in the mail and like since I'm a writer, like I can like write like a whole fanzine like in a letter and I'd be like, well, it maybe be better if I just put it in the fanzine, then don't have to write the same letter over and over and over again to all these different people or whatever. But I might make like 25 copies and that would be it.
Well, two bands I did definitely want to talk to you about that I didn't really get a chance to last time were Bam Bam and the Fastbacks, two incredibly important bands featuring women that seem to just be, well, less with the Fastbacks, more with Bam Bam, but just kind of like local legends for the most part.
Well, here's the thing. I didn't know about Bam Bam. I mean, I think like I read about them but it's like I said, I didn't know about Poison. Like I don't remember seeing Poison Idea either. So
Mm-hmm.
there's like it's just a ton of stuff that you would miss, like especially if you're young. I don't remember knowing about Bam Bam. And like someone contacted me like in the past couple of years, I think it was during quarantine or something. It was like, can you give us a quote about this? And I was like, or can you write the intro to this? And I was like, I don't think I'm the person to do that because like I just read about this like this year or something. And then, I remember being like to Donna, who I mentioned before, Donna Dress, she's like one of my best friends growing up. I was like, do you remember them? And she's like, no, I don't remember them. And I was like, it's kind of weird, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
were going up to Seattle and I don't know, we just missed it. So I don't know that much about that. And I'm sure there's like reasons for that. Uh I don't know. Like part of it could be racism, right? Like of people not including them in this like kind of punk realm or whatever in their minds. Kind of how like if there's a girl in a band, it almost becomes like less likely to be called a hardcore band or something. Like maybe like that just wasn't punk in some people's like white people's minds. Like I don't know. I'm just guessing. So I don't know. But the Fastbacks definitely I think that was one of the first bands I saw that had women in it. And I saw them when I was like 14. So I did know about that band. There's
What,
a lot of other bands that from Seattle that I try to remember the names of that had women in them that used to play the Tropicana. I'm not thinking of it right now though.
well, believe me, I will. I'm sure it'll be jogged at some point in the conversation. But
Yeah.
just going back to Bam Bam for a second, it's interesting because it's a band that, yeah, like once again, I would have been, now hearing the single, I'm like, I can't believe I didn't know about this thing. And it wasn't, especially in the Kill by Death era, especially in the grunge freak out, everyone's a record collector era. I'm surprised it didn't become much more of a talked about single.
Yeah, and I don't have it either. So I mean, I don't know. I'll have to seek that out. And I
I,
remember like I read an article about it and I immediately like tried to text a bunch of people. I was like, do you know about this band? Like, is this real? Like, how could we have missed this?
well, and
Um,
there's a story that Kurt Cobain roadied for him too.
I don't think that's true. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah. I imagine there's like a lot of legend that gets thrown on top of things when things get discovered as well.
I mean, he told me he went to one Tropicana show. I don't remember him from then. And like he's told me he got a ride with the Melvins or something to go see Black Flag and he got super wasted and passed out and missed Black Flag and then they just like made fun of him the whole, rest of his life basically. He's like, I missed that whole scene. But
I get
like Auburn's an hour away, and it's hard to get around when you're a kid.
absolutely, and that's the thing. Until you're in the Pacific Northwest, I think like well, certainly speaking as myself as a music fan, you think all these things are happening on top of each other. Even within Seattle, like Seattle's a big city itself, and there were, from now reading a lot more history of it, like understanding there's different regions of the city and different sounds attached to different regions of the city.
Yeah, and I actually also like, maybe this is part of the Bam thing. Maybe like that was going on during the Tropicana because until the Tropicana closed, I wasn't going to Seattle that much,
Mm-hmm.
because we had too many shows here and it was hard to get rides up there.
Were you at that show when Guns N' Roses played, and I think the Fastbacks played too?
I don't know. Like I asked Buzz about that recently. I was like, "What do you remember at that night?" Like, because I feel like I was at the show that you played, and then I remember someone telling me that that Guns N' Roses thing happened the same night, and in my mind I feel like I was there, but then I was like, I don't know. It's just like there's this one time like that the Dicks played at the 56th Street House in Tacoma, and for a long time I was like, I think I was at that show, and I was like, I think that was at the show where like, we had this horrible thing happen where like my friend she didn't overdose, but she got into something, and she was very self-destructive, and we ended up there was some kind of emergency, and I was like, I think that's why I don't really remember the Dicks, because I think that was the night this other fucked up thing happened. But when you're a kid, like that and you're going to a show and like Black Flag or something, like I remember my friend cut her face open and she should have gone to the hospital, but she was like, no, man, I'm gonna like slam dance to Black Flag or whatever, and if I go to the hospital, my parents will know that like I'm not spending the night at your house and all this stuff. And I'm like, what are you gonna tell them? She's like, I'm gonna tell them that I like fell, like we were skating and like I fell on a mailbox. And I'm like,
Oh my
I
god!
think you need to go to the hospital. But like stuff like that, like you would get into these trouble kind of situations, and I don't know. So I don't think I saw the Dicks, and I don't know if I was there the night that Guns N' Roses played. It's like too long ago too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's I guess it speaks to how much stuff is happening too, and how much
Yeah.
music you're taking in.
Yeah, I remember like Dylan, from Earth, and Slim, who started Kill Rock Stars. They were in a band called like Eights and Aces, and Donna was in this band Danger Mouse, and so Danger Mouse played with Eights and Aces or something, and then we met them at Guerrilla Gardens, and they would tell us about stuff. So maybe they just told us about that. But I do remember when Guns N' Roses played, like a bunch of people from this one punk house here, they played maybe it was like 86 or 87. They played, like they were already on the radio and stuff. Like they played a big show, and I was like, we're going to see that band, like we saw it, Guerrilla Gardens or whatever. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Did
Uh,
did any of the like farts or like 10 minute warning ever play Olympia, or did you ever see those bands?
not that I don't know. They might have played here that I remember that. Like, I don't know if you know who the Rejectors are. I think I might have mentioned them.
Absolutely, Split with the Accused.
Yeah. So this is kind of a funny story. Like the singer from the Rejectors, this kid named Bruce, um, he lived in an apartment with some students in this neighborhood where near my parents' house, like just down the street, basically. And I was still delivering, like I was the paper girl. So like I'd started going to punk shows and I looked like I was like a, 9 or something. And like I had to knock on their door and be like, I'm here to collect. And I was like, oh my God, like these punk rockers live here or whatever. And then I was just like, I found out he was in the Rejectors. And I was just like so embarrassed. And also they would never pay their bill. And I would just be like, I'm sorry, but you like owe me $8. Like, I was always just like, and then he was like, I'm sorry, it's my roommate, it's not me. And I didn't subscribe. We need to cancel this or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, but somebody needs to pay the $8 because I've already paid it. $8 is a lot of money. So that was like this awkward thing about me and that singer from the Rejectors. And then finally I got to see his band play, and it made it a little bit more normal. But he like works at the library. I used to work at the library, so like I still know that guy. But that was my funny thing of like, yeah, I am really embarrassed that I'm the paper girl and you're like the cool punk guy or whatever.
Well, I'm the one who paid hundreds of dollars for that 7 inch, so I'm the one who should probably be embarrassed.
Yeah, maybe he should get me a copy. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That say you owe me $8 plus interest. I'll just take a 7 inch.
But I do know that he was a skateboarder, and like he told me like kind of recently, I don't know, kind of recently is like what maybe in the past 5 years, like he said, or no, Steve Turner from Mudhoney and Green River told me this, that like they used to come down to Olympia to skateboard in, the 80s, and I was just like, okay, like I don't remember that. And he's like, oh no, like, the skate park in Lacey, which is Lacey is near Olympia. It's like one town over. I mean, they border each other. It's basically the same town. And I was like, there was an indoor skate park in Lacey. And I lived here then and I didn't know about it. Like, I was just like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And he was like, oh yeah, everyone used to go to there all the time. This is the only indoor skate park in the Pacific Northwest. So I asked Bruce, like when I was at the library one time, I was like, do you used to go to this place? And he was like, oh yeah, definitely. That's like the first time I ever used to I came to Olympia. It was like everyone went there. And I was like, so I guess like that was maybe one way how kids from Seattle and different areas around the Northwest knew about the, shows in Olympia. And I was completely oblivious about that too. And we like drove out there and I was like, this is just like, a strip mall basically.
It's fascinating too how like at that point, because there is no centralized hub for information, you could miss something like that because it's completely plausible. You could completely miss bands happening or whole buildings that have skate parks in them just because if you didn't know the right kid that was there, you weren't going to find out about it.
Yeah, and there was a ramp in called the Lacey Ramp in like my friend Chris Barwick's parents' backyard. And so I thought everyone was talking about that. And they were like, oh no, not that like crummy like quarter pipe or whatever, like actually a skate park. And I was just like, I don't know. And then like, yeah, so there was a skate a skate ramp in Olympia. It was a really crappy quarter pipe and then a half pipe. And there was only one and it was outside and like they didn't really want you to skate on it. I don't know. Like I never really got too into that aspect of skating because I just would use my skateboard to like hang out or like get from show to the bus or whatever. I mean, I would skate, but like not like doing not how skateboarding culture is now, where it's like completely based around tricks or whatever, and definitely didn't learn any vertical skills or whatever. But yeah, that's another thing is like skating. There weren't skate parks around here. I mean, I guess there was, but yeah, the larger point is like it was hard to find out about. We spent a lot of time in the parking garage skating because it was raining out.
It's interesting with skateboarding too because like you can kind of track the commercialization of it from just people throwing roller skates onto the bottom of boards to the sort of rise of this industry. But it's interesting now how it's obviously still a huge part of punk rock, but at one point it was punk rock in and of itself, it feels like. And skateboarders who have been on the show said that as well. So I'm not just talking from a
Yeah.
fat kid that didn't skateboard position.
And like one of the things that we would do when we were kids is like try like in our neighborhood before we knew about really like punk or whatever, like if we saw someone with a skateboard that moved into our neighborhood, we're like, that person's from California. They probably know who Black Flag is. And it was always true. It's just like they wore Vans and they had like, and they wouldn't even be punk. They would just be like some Jeff Spicoli dudes or something, like Fast Times guys. But like they would always know about punk. And so yeah, I think that's my experience is that that's true. Like skateboarding and punk were like very in sync.
It's funny when you look at California, it's almost like the birth of punk as a soundtrack and less of punk as a lifestyle. Like obviously it was a lifestyle to a lot of people there, but it's also the birthplace of punk being the soundtrack to skateboarding or surfing or just being a young person at a certain point in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, and this was the 80s, so it was like definitely youth culture. It was kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But even then, like you're saying, like there were people that saw Black Flag that went to Black Flag shows that might have even been quote unquote hardcore kids that had no relationship to punk or no relationship to the ideology. It was just part of the soundtrack to their youth.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah. I
Um,
agree.
with the Fastbacks, did they come to Olympia or where did you see them? Was it in Seattle?
No, I saw them in Olympia. They played at the Tropicana, really with the Melvins, one of the first Melvins shows, I think. And then we had the record at Chaos, the EP. And I remember talking to them too, at that show, which is, just so cool. You could just be like a little kid and the band got done playing and you could just go up and say, "Hey, I like your band. Like, where are you from?" And they would just talk to you. Like that was just really neat.
It's also funny how, like you were saying earlier, like here we are, no longer youth, still talking about this stuff. And you look at the fastbacks, like there's this idea of being a lifer in this thing, and how punk is like this infection you pick up as a young person that will just stay with you and will, like Kent McClard said it in that abolition essay, will fuck up your life.
I mean, sure, there's that side of it too. I mean, I mean, just like, there's pros and cons. Like it has destroyed certain people and it's saved people's lives. There's
I,
like the positive and the negative, like the nihilism and then you know, the the thing that gives your life meaning. And sometimes it's the nihilism that like gets you through.
it also feels like it's like coming out of the Matrix. Like it's, like you step out of it and all the things that people chase in society that are cool are uncool. And all the things that most people think are not cool, like obscure music and dressing shitty and all this kind of stuff, become cool. It very much flips it on its head a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that.
And you carry that with for the rest of your life. Like anytime I try and fit in a social situation, I'm like constantly looking at it through this sort of like weird post Bikini Kill, post Minor Threat, post like I don't know, Jello Biafra crystal, where I have to like it all gets fractured and it doesn't look right.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure like someone could write a great movie, a punk Matrix. Maybe it's already been done.
Yeah, I don't know if we need that. I think we could probably cast it in our heads right now and do a better job than the
Like,
actual film would do.
yeah, like the actual like time traveling aspect of it, or like going through portals or whatever. I think that's very real. Like it's very strange.
Mm-hmm. How did the working with Joan Jett come about?
Um, the way I remember it is that we were in like at this group house in DC called Pirate House that like Ian Brendan lived at, and Ian Svenonius. And I don't know, it was like me and someone from my band. I'm not sure who. And someone like knocked on the door of one of the rooms, like, "We're gonna go see Joan Jett. Do you guys want to come?" And like, I don't know why, but I was like, "No, I'm not gonna go, but here." And then they were trying to talk me into going, and I was like, well, I'd never seen her before. I for some reason didn't want to go. So they're like, "Oh, come on, come with us. She's great live." And I was just like, "It's okay." And I was like, "But wait," or someone was like, "Well, find a Bikini Kill tape and we'll try to give it to her." And I was like, "Okay, well, hang on." And then so I wrote like I like was like, I should put like contact information on it. So I just like wrote, "For a good time, call Kathleen." And I was like, "Give this to Joan." And I didn't even remember it, right? So then I didn't tell Kathleen that. And then at the time, Joan is from Rockville, Maryland, I think originally, which is near DC. And so she was already friends with the Fugazi guys and stuff. And then, they were hanging out at the show. I know she was a Lungfish fan too. Um, probably because they're from Baltimore or whatever. But anyway, so fast forward, I don't know how much time went by, but like we're at a different punk house in DC. This is when we lived there, so it was 92. And then we're sitting on the porch of this house called the Embassy, and we're doing an interview for like, I don't know, it was like NPR or something. It was like a hard interview, and like somebody had microphones out and blah blah blah, and then someone came out and they were like, "Kathleen, you have a phone call," and she's like, "Hey, I'm doing an interview," and they're like, "It's Joan Jett," and she's like, "Yeah, right." And then I think she tells the story like from her point of view, like in the movie about Joan Jett or whatever, but like it really was, she called her on the phone, and then I was like, we really should ask her to record us because she recorded the Germs record. And then I don't know, somehow that took like about a year or whatever, but we ended up recording with her and she played on the Rebel Girl single and stuff. And Kathleen and her became really good friends. So that was neat.
What was that experience like for you recording? Like, were you a Runaways fan, or like obviously you're a Germs fan?
Yeah. And, like when people used to assume, that I was like a massive Joan Jett fan. And like I was like I really wasn't a massive like I can say I can speak with authority on like the Go-Go's. Like I was in the fan club, saw them live. I didn't have MTV, you know, and my parents didn't have the Joan Jett record. My aunt Priscilla gave me some Joan Jett stuff when I was in junior high, and I did like it. And I remember bristling a little bit, like in this you know, like how kids are very literal. Like I remember being like, put another dime in the jukebox. I'm like, a jukebox costs 25 cents. And then I was also thinking about it. I was like, this is kind of like, it's like it's like they want you to go back to like Happy Days and Fonzie, you know, like when kids were playing the jukebox. I'm all like, we play video games. You know what I mean? Like we ride our bikes to the place that has video games and there's no jukebox there. So like I kind of just was like, that's kind of hokey a little bit. Like I did really like the single at first, but then like from the perspective of like a little kid, it seemed like it was going back to a 70s,
Mm-hmm.
like the 50s, 70s kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but you know, I at the same time I did respond to it as a little kid. Like I remember roller skating around and liking stuff, but I don't know that much about. I didn't consider myself like a massive fan or anything, but I've seen her play live. I mean, like it's funny because like I played live on a stage with her before I'd ever seen her play live, but I've seen her play live recently, like 2018 or something. She's incredible. Like, you know, she's magnetic. She's incredible. I mean, I feel bad that I ever kind of like try to say that I wasn't a fan because of course, like she's great. I just I was more a fan of the Germs record, which was the reason why I wanted to work with her. But also like I could just see like in my mind like that her and Kathleen would really connect and they totally do, you know. And Kathleen's always talking about like how she's got one of the best voices in the, you know, ever of all time. And it's really true. Like her singing voice is incredible. Then Runaways, like I think like I do love them. I heard them only like in the early 90s. So I think I would say that they were definitely influenced on Bikini Kill because we were listening to it at the time when the band started.
Well, I think it's also, you know, because you're a hardcore kid, right? Probably, you know, like a lot of this stuff is, you know, it's more rock and roll and less like coming from the hardcore kind of way of
Yeah, and there
things.
was so much sexism against the Runaways. Like people thought, you know, it was just they, you know, it's worse than the Go-Go's. Like people thought that like they didn't, you know, have any kind of control over their image, which I mean, I guess maybe that's part of that was true, but like people just really saw them as manufactured and did not appreciate them for being like actually like very groundbreaking, very serious about playing music, you know, real musicians. And I think that the people who did take them seriously were kids like Pat Smear and Darby Crash and, you know, the LA punk kids that were part of that like scene, that Rodney's English disco, like those people really took the Runaways seriously, like people who saw them, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Steve McDonald and
Yeah,
Jeff.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they also like not to undercut anything the Go Go's had to overcome or went through, but they also had like by all accounts a legit predator managing them at the
Yeah,
time too. So
for sure. And that had to be very traumatizing. And plus, they had to deal with a lot of homophobia, you know.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I guess the other thing I wanted to ask you about was you mentioned 7 seconds last time, and them being a big kind of influence on you at a certain point. When was the first time you saw 7 seconds? Do you remember, or like some of the times you saw them at least?
I saw them twice. So I saw them at Guerrilla Gardens. I'm trying to think, 84, 85. Um, I heard them on Calvin's radio show, and one of the first conversations we had was about 7 seconds, and he put them on a tape for me. And then he's like, you know, you can order the record for $5, like, and he wrote down the address or whatever. So I ordered the crew or whatever. And then I saw him on that tour, and then this band MPO opened for them, I think, and that was John Goodmanson's hardcore band, and he ended up recording Bikini Kill with Joan Jett. So it's funny. But yeah, his hardcore band like opened for 7 seconds. In at Guerrilla Gardens, and I don't remember who else played, but there's probably a flyer somewhere. And then the second time I saw them was it was like it was early 86 and it was in Olympia. It was a walk together, rock together kind of era, maybe. I'm not sure what album was out, but like I know they did the 99 Lift Balloon song or whatever. And they seemed like a completely different band. And me and my friends like that show was really wild because it was Danger Mouse, Melvins, Unseen Force, the Yobs, and 7 Seconds. And it's very memorable because it was at this the Olympia Community Center, which has since been torn down, but I think it was the only show that was ever there. So, and it was huge. It was a huge, huge, huge all ages show when hardcore kids came from all over. And it just seemed really out of control, like completely insane and very fun and super positive because by that time, like Seattle had banned all ages shows. And so we had this thing called the YDC, the Youth Defense Council, which were these kids that were like, if you buy this card for $5, the money will go towards putting on more all ages shows. And you're like, okay, sure. Then you get a lifetime membership or whatever. But then it turned out that they had been taken over by like the Revolutionary Communist Party or whatever. They're trying to get you to join. So it was just a little bit confusing, but I joined the YDC and then we started something in Olympia called Youth for Direct Action, which is a little more anarchist, YDA. But anyways, that's another story. But the thing that's really memorable about that 7 Seconds show, though, or a couple things, is like that was when I first remember seeing the Melvins play "I Flies," "Eyes Fly." How do you say that? The name of the song? The really slow song.
Yeah.
Melvins Glee Porch Treatments.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it? Eyes Flies?
I can never remember if it's "Eyes Flies" or "Eyes Flies." "I Flies." I don't know. That song.
Yeah, that song. Yeah.
So they're gonna open for 7 Seconds. So their idea is they're gonna play the slowest song of all time to all these like kids who just want to hear like fast music. And obviously like 7 Seconds are at that time just doing like melodic pop that's not even fast. So like, the kids with the mohawks and everything, there was a lot of like expectation of like, we want it to be just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that kind of music. And it wasn't at all. So I thought that was kind of funny. Like the Melvins came out and they played like that Judas Priest song, Loaded, right? And then they went into Ice Flies. And I remember this because there's a tape of the show. And then after the show, we went, like, the Melvins came over to, like, my boyfriend's house. And I remember, like, we listened to the tape of their set as soon as the show was over. And we were all just, like, in this room, like that's how obsessed with the Melvins we were. Like, do you want to come over and drink beer, like, or whatever? Like, we can listen to your tape. And then they're like, oh, yeah, sure. And so, I mean, we were friends or whatever. And maybe they might have crashed there or something. But, like, so we were, like, listening to the tape with them. And I remember, like, it was very exciting because they were about to drive down to San Francisco to record Glee Porch Treatments, which is why they recorded it and why they wanted to listen to it. But then I remember also, like, we were trying to get 7 Seconds to come over, and they were like, I think we're just going to go to a Motel 6. And I was just like, okay, first of all, what punk band goes to a motel and doesn't go hang out at the punk house after the show? And then also, like, they're drinking beer? I thought they were straight edge. like really confused. They're like, oh, we're going to go get some beer. And I was like, 7 Seconds drinks beer? And I was like, what?
The edge break gets to a lot of them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was necessarily everyone, but then, of course, I think about that night a lot because I'm just like, oh, yeah, like when you come to a town and like the kids want to hang out with you afterwards, you're like, we're going to a hotel now and we're going to a Motel 6. Like, we're all going to share one room, but like, we're getting away from you. You know what I mean?
And then we get that age when you're a little bit older in a punk band and you're all of a sudden like, yeah, we got to get a motel. There's no way we're staying at this house.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. That was like the band, the Old Haunts, the band I was in when I was like, when I was turning 40, I was like, I can't do this, like, gonna stay at the punk house anymore, like with my face in the cat litter box. I gotta get a motel. I'm sorry.
A lot of times it's a dice roll. You don't know what the house is going to be like when you get.
I mean, and I often did not win that battle. We ended up with a lot of cat litter, type accommodations, which I appreciate. Thank you for putting us up, but I was a little too old for that, I think.
Yeah. It's a young person's game, that side of the punk rock socializing post show type thing. But it's interesting to kind of think of like what you're describing, where there is that kind of turning point, where people begin looking other places for the sounds. Like people don't necessarily want just fast hardcore anymore, and don't necessarily want even the old bands anymore. And there's sort of like this turn towards new bands like the Melvins or the other bands that would kind of like make up the next wave.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Melvins were around during the fast time of hardcore too, and but and then like we said before, like those hardcore bands were still, the Dehumanizers were still playing all the time. The Accused, they were doing the crossover thing, but like they were still playing fast.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, it never went away, like you were saying before too, right? Like bands are still playing fast to this day,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but there almost is that, like Dinosaur Jr. From Deep Wound to Melvin's getting slower. There's this sort of even I guess Green River to Mudhoney, or maybe even Mr. Ep to Green River before that. Like there's sort of this search for like what's beyond hardcore and punk going on. It feels like.
Well, and there was two eras of Green River too. Like the first era was more fast, more thrash, I would say, like skater thrash kind of, and then the last era of Green River, which I really like, was a lot more like Aerosmith kind of glammy. They had that like malfunctiony kind of influence. I mean, they weren't the same, but they were growing their hair out and doing I remember Green River having like a kind of Iggy and the Stooges presentation but maybe like a little more glammy in the second era of Green River.
Mhm.
They still seemed like a skate band, like like in the sense that Tales of Terror were like skate rock or whatever.
Yeah, I love that Green River stuff. Like all the stuff that was recorded. Were they playing like all ages type shows, or is that like a band that would be playing exclusively kind of more the bar shows that Poison Idea would wind up playing?
Um, in Olympia, there were no bar shows. I mean, there were no bar shows for punks, at least in the 80s. And even in the early 90s, there really wasn't too many. But in Seattle, I think Green River were playing bars mostly because it was hard. There was all ages shows were banned. So that's why, like, when the Sub Pop stuff started happening, they would have those like gigantic, I mean, the pre-grunge or whatever, the beginning of that, when those shows started happening, their all ages shows were so huge, like the Lame Fest one at the Moore Theater with, I think, I can't remember who played, like Nirvana and maybe Tad and Mudhoney or whatever. And then the one where like Dan Peters played drums at the Motor Hall. I can't remember what that venue's called, but with the dwarves or whatever. Those shows were just like so huge because they were all ages, and like it seemed like, yeah, you'd go up to Seattle and you'd see these like sub pop bands play or whatever doing the like grungy thing, and it was like yeah, it was a different era. It definitely was, because that was like when Sub Pop were doing their kind of condescending thing of like, yeah, we're just gonna sell you this stuff and you're gonna be dumb enough to buy it, like kind of thing. And then I feel like they would really like do that kind of like insulting marketing scammer kind of thing to kids. It
Yeah,
was just it was a little bit jaded.
yeah, and it became I don't know, it became kind of the attitude for independent labels a little bit, like the cockiness, like they really did kind of set an approach. I guess it existed before, like kind of a forced exposure
Oh yeah, it
approach.
definitely, especially through Bruce's writing. Like he wrote a column for the Rocket, which was a free weekly magazine. And his writing, you can read it, go back and read his Sub Pop columns now. Like he's a great writer. So is Byron, so is Mike McGonigal, so is Gerard. Like all of those guys were great writers, but they all had this kind of like, I mean, to varying degrees, a lot of there's that aspect of like, you really got the feeling when you're reading that writing as a girl, you're like, oh, they don't expect any girls to be reading this. It's kind of like when I was like, because I'm a basketball fan, and like my friend mailed me that Bill Simmons big book of basketball, and I'm like reading it, and I'm like, he doesn't expect like any women to be reading this book. It's just like assumed that the audience is like and it's almost like they can say these kind of like like sexist or mildly sexist kind of like macho kind of tropes just because it's like how guys talk to each other when there's no women in the room kind of thing. It was just kind of like annoying. So then like the when I moved down to Eugene, like the guys who live down there, they're really literary. Like they were in the English honors like my friends, like the people who are in some Velvet Sidewalk and Snake Pit, they were like honors English students at U of O, which is not an easy school to get into. Like in Oregon, you have to have, it's a public school, but it's the big public school. Like you have to have good grades. So they were good students and they were great writers. And they started making my friend started making a music fanzine called True Reality Rock Report. And it was exactly just like a piss take on like the Byron Coley, like there's like, we're going to tell you exactly what to think about this record, like this is the definitive word. This is the True Reality Rock Report. And they would kind of like make fun of like Sub Pop a little bit. I mean, not in a like, I think their dream would be like for Bruce Pavitt to review their single, right? But like they're sort of making fun of it too. But so we like Olympia, Eugene, people kind of had an attitude a little bit like towards like big city kind of stuff, like and those guys. And like when I started Jigsaw, like I was like, I'm not one of these cool gonna tell you what to do, like this is the way like to think about everything type of people, but I want to make a fanzine. So I was there, also trying to get my voice in there. But yeah, that's definitely a part of it. And like when the Go Team went on tour, like we would sell the records distributed by K, and everyone would just want the Sub Pop singles that were like the colored vinyl and the limited edition. And I was just like, I don't even know why you guys like this stuff. And I remember like it was just about the rarity and it was just about the colored vinyl. And it was like, you don't even know what this band sounds like. And they're just like marketing it to you. And it was just like very frustrating. It's like, why don't you buy the Vaselines? This record is actually really good. No, I don't want that one. I want this, like, I don't want to badmouth anyone, but something that I thought was much lesser quality, or more macho or 70s or long hair kind of stuff. And I remember I got back from the first Go Team tour. I was like, I'm gonna cut all of my hair off, because I had like grown my hair out from punk, because it was like, like bands had longer hair, and then like I just like basically shaved my head, and then like Calvin's like, what's going on? I was like, yeah, I'm not into Sub Pop. And like he was like, what do you have against Bruce? And I was just like, it's not the sound of the revolution. I was just like, basically like, like I'd met like the guys who were going to go on to start like Nation of Ulysses or whatever. And I was like, I'm with these guys, like we're going to start a new thing. Like that's not about like the 70s or like doing drugs or telling people that they're stupid or, whatever. I don't know. So it was definitely like the 90s were about to start, and it kind of seemed like I could see the future, like, and at the same time, like I loved Nirvana, and of course, like I adored Kurt, and like I his songwriting, to this day is like, of course, it's unquestionably great or whatever, and I don't lump him in with all that stuff, but like at the same time, like it seemed a little bit like aesthetically things were going backwards to like the 70s or something.
Hmm.
I don't include him in that because he was very progressive, but like a lot of the Sub Pop shit it really just seemed like they're just trying to like insult you, like, and market stuff to you in this way that I didn't appreciate. I mean, now it seems terrible to even badmouth it because, they became a great record label that like helped so much, so many people have, basically like be able to be musicians, like working musicians and make a living at it and stuff. And I have like a lot of respect for that. But at the time it was like, I don't know.
It's funny because you look at where the music industry, particularly the vinyl industry, has gone, and they were almost the canary in the coal mine for the commodification of the 7-inch or the record versus it as, like we were saying about zines, like the way the zine was there to give you the music, like you wanted a certain color of vinyl. And once again, I say this in full admittal of my own problem with record collecting, but it's interesting to kind of look at that now.
Here, I'm not, I'll say I'm not a record collector, but like a lot of records, and that's
some
not
records. Yeah.
So there's a lot of, but I think I used to buy records because there was like no other way to hear music,
Mm-hmm. I think for me, it's a way to touch. Like when I pay a lot of money for a record, it's like I'm buying the Rejector 7-inch, and there's sort of this idea that these guys had folded this 7-inch, or there's almost like touching history through handling the artifact type thing.
I would love to have all that shit, but I don't, and by the time I started like being like, oh yeah, like I don't, like I bought like a lot of English punk stuff in the 90s over in England, like Buzzcock singles or The Fall or, the Rough Trade stuff. Like I have those things. But then I like look at my collection. I was like, I really don't have like American hardcore 7 inches or whatever. Like I have very few. And it's just they're too expensive. Like, I don't know.
Hmm.
Right. Even like in the 90s, they were too expensive for me.
Like, given that you've kind of rejected, where, for lack of a better term, grunge, or the sub pop at that point where sub pop was this early on, what did you think on sort of the next mutation of this thing when you had bands that were completely disconnected from punk kind of being lumped into this thing? And obviously your thing is completely different, but you are watching this thing kind of unfold. What were your thoughts as grunge becomes this phenomenon?
Oh, you mean like after like Nirvana hit top 40 and all that?
Yeah, and like the rise of Pearl Jam and like obviously Soundgarden's part of it, but I mean like there are other bands that aren't necessarily part of this thing, and obviously Pearl Jam coming out of Green River is part of it too. But I mean like when the sound stopped being even just punk throwing back to the '70s, it started becoming more just '70s rock, for lack
I
of a
mean,
better
it
word.
just it like to be honest, like I didn't really pay attention to pop culture. Like obviously this is all pop culture, but like mainstream pop culture, like I did pay attention to it when I was in middle school. Like I paid attention to the charts and stuff like that. I never had MTV ever, like until maybe 96 or something. So, I was kind of not in the awareness of I feel like one apartment I lived in like 96 had MTV because I remember watching it then. But and I remember watching it the summer of 85 when I was babysitting one summer. My knowledge of like what's popular is always just either non-existent or very unless I was super focused on it like I was in middle school, but like I didn't really know. Um so yeah, there's people talk to me about the 90s. I'm like, I don't fucking know shit about 90s. Like I'm like people like my bandmate from Spire in the Webs was like talking about the Cranberries all the time. And I was just like, I don't know what they sound like. They're oh come on, you know what they sound like. I'm like, I don't like I don't know who that is. Like I just don't know a lot of shit. Like so I don't know that I was that aware of it. What the thing, when Nirvana came big, like or mainstream, like that was, there was a lot of complicated feelings. But like one of the things that was very positive about it was like to really see the positive impact that they had, like the feminist impact that they had on people, like this, just and like the anti-racist, anti-homophobic, pro women stuff that they would say, like that was just so great. And also like something that we didn't really talk about is like how many punks used to get beat up, for just like kind of like crossing like the line of like what was okay for like a boy to dress like or whatever. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, if you're wearing that, then you must be a fag, and then I'm gonna kill you, kind of shit. Like, there's real casualties. Like one time I was standing out in front of the Tropicana and it was like raining and some like, for lack of a better term, like redneck came by like in like a truck and threw a tire iron that like brushed my temple. Like I felt the force of it go by like this and broke the window, like like that. And if it had hit me, I could have been killed, right?
Oh yeah.
Or
Yeah.
blinded, or brain dead or whatever. And there, some people actually were like this guy Rick Lewis. He was like the singer for a while of this band, the Moral Robbers. He did a radio show. He did like the Maximum Rock and Roll radio show on Chaos. And he like was going to a show at Guerrilla Gardens on New Year's Eve, 1985, with a bunch of friends, and like a gang of kids like jumped somebody, and he came to their assistance, and they beat him to death, basically, and using like homophobic slurs, and he was like a punk, and he was in a wheelchair for 2 years and he died. Like shit like that happened. So like when Nirvana like was, becoming big, like, and that they're having like a positive impact on culture in my view, like people became more tolerant, like even here, like it would be like, I remember like punk, like if you look like punk, like you go to the store and like people would be really rude to you, and like Justin from Unwound and me like made up this song that was it was a really goofy song, but we like made it up one time that was like um said like thank you Nirvana for buying us beer, thank you Nirvana for letting us practice here, and we sang it like in this really like thank you Nirvana for buying us beer, thank you for Nirvana for letting us practice here. And like it was like because you could go to the fucking 7-Eleven and they wouldn't ID you because they'd be like, are you in a band? Cool, you know. And then like they wouldn't call like the cops would come and they'd be like, are you kids in a band? Oh great, is the sound, you know, like do you know Kurt Cobain or whatever? And like they wouldn't give you a ticket, you know, like just shit like that. Like it changed. Like, I mean, this is Olympia, right? So like it really changed. And everybody here has like a fucking Kurt Cobain story. Is like, oh, Kurt Cobain's uncle, blah, 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 blah. And you know, half of that shit is not true. Like, I don't even bother to tell people anything. Like, I'm just like, whatever. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah. Well,
But I
it's
do think that they had a largely positive impact.
oh, absolutely. Like you were saying last time we talked about that Sex Pistols thing that may or may not have been on 60 Minutes. Like, you need these massive cultural moments to get the next generation of kids that are going to be the DIY scene on board. And I think you're seeing it now with Turnstile and the kind of the explosion in popularity of that band, where hopefully this replenishes the scene, you know, and like the 12 and 13-year-olds and 11-year-olds that got into punk because of Nirvana are the 21-year-old kids running the DIY spaces in their local town and getting bands to play and doing Food Not Bombs. Every band that comes on the show, like, it's amazing. They're a band that, you know, Fat Mike from NoFX said they're the reason he was able to kind of continue to do this thing as a living. And just, it was a cultural shift that changed music forever.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, we like Kill Rock Stars like was I mean, I say we because I worked at that label for almost 20 years. Like we were able to, you know, like at the same time we're going like don't sign to a major label or whatever, but the fact that they did sign to a major label, put everything in the mainstream and then would talk about their hometown scene like in public, like they would talk about Bikini Kill, they would talk about Bits of Depression, you know, and stuff like that. And then people would write us a letter and like actually like Nirvana was on the first Kill Rock Stars compilation. And that was, you know, like if that hadn't all happened, like there might have not been money to put out the first Bikini Kill EP, you know? And there certainly wouldn't have been like we wouldn't have sold 10,000 of them like immediately. Like I don't think. Like I mean, like maybe like we could have built up that momentum, but there was stuff like it wasn't just that, it was also like Ian MacKaye recorded the EP, you know, so people had it on their radar. And then you know, there was a lot of complicated relationships between the underground and the mainstream that actually helped the underground thrive. That is definitely true.
Well, it's interesting because I think, you know, you in Bikini Kill exist almost on both sides of this Nirvana explosion that's happening. At like one time, like you're saying, like, you know, it helped you, but I think at the same time, you're also part of this DIY hardcore thing that also was so big and your band is so important to that it's almost like I'm just fascinated by your perspective because you are seeing it from both sides of this thing at the same time.
Yeah, and you know, for us personally, it was very sad because like our friends got famous and then we never really saw them again. You know, it's not like the last time I saw Nirvana was like October 31st, 1991. You know, I didn't see them again, you know, and I saw like all their early shows, like even before they were called that or whatever. So, you know, it was quite sad in a way. But, you know, and also like the drugs and shit like that. But like it, you know, it's hard to talk about. But like
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff really was positive.
Well, I guess shifting gears a little bit, what do you think it is about the Melvins that attracted this cult? Like, it goes on to the day, like they're the band that I would describe. They're almost like they're like a cult band, like the definition of what a cult band is. But it seems like that, like you're saying, began right away where people are going and hanging out with them to listen to live recordings of their show just after they happened, kind of in the beginning. Oh, not right
Melvin,
at the beginning, but
the last Melvin show I saw was like right before COVID. So I guess it was like probably November 2019 or whatever, when I was in LA. And it was maybe the best Melvin show I've ever seen. Like they just continue to fucking get better. Like I don't know like any band that that's true of, you know, and they don't rest. They're not just like playing the oldies, right? They're like writing new shit. They're always moving forward. I mean, they're incredible. They're incredible musicians. They're tapped into some like crazy life death force field of like power, and I don't even know how to describe it. Like, if you've seen them and you've experienced it, it's like there's I don't even necessarily believe in God, but there's God and there's Satan and there's death and there's life and there's this force that it's not just music. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I mean, to not overuse the term, but they're like truly sublime. Like, they're in touch with something that's like out of this world. Like, it's not just like they're a good band. Like, they're beyond music to me.
Yeah, they're like, I totally get what you're saying because I feel the same way about them, where it's almost like these two people that have signed like like this Faustian deal with whatever forces out there, that they're just going to live this art to the extreme. But like, they're one of the only, like, they're like a band like the Grateful Dead that I would love people just to be trading different tapes of live performances, because like you're saying, they're still putting on like shows of their lives, unlike the Grateful Dead this far into their career.
Yeah, and they're one of the only consistencies of my life, really. Like,
Yeah.
during quarantine and COVID and everything, I was like very extremely isolated, having like a lot of challenges, like being so isolated. And like the Melvins were still putting on live shows that were you could live stream them or whatever. I guess they were pre-recorded, but you could stream them, and it cost like $5 or whatever. And like, I would, text my friend Jill and be like, we're gonna go to this Melvins show at this time, and we're gonna text each other and watch the Melvins. And like, seriously, like it was a true gift.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
also, it's funny, like when the Melvins broke up, the first time supposedly the Melvins broke up when they moved to California, it was like I felt like my life was over. And then I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, you need to start your own band. Like, you can't just like, but I just remember like walking around going like, how is this possible that this band could have broken up? Like, who even am I? And I was just like, clearly, like, it's time to get on with your life, like, and it's funny because they're always just like, no one gave a shit about us in the Northwest. And I was just like, I beg to differ. There was a small group of people who cared a lot.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it feels like it's almost like a cult. Like, and I can't see, well, obviously Buzz is very charismatic and kind of holds a room, but I can't see them courting that. Maybe they did at that time, but like, to me, it just feels like they had that effect on people naturally, where people wanted to kind of like, especially young people, wanted to be around this band and kind of be around that power.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it wasn't image or anything. It was just realness. It was like clearly they worked harder than everybody else, and they probably still do. So there's that. But then also there's just something that they tap into that's just there, that they, I don't know, for lack of a better word, they like channel it. Like, it's like this live energy that comes through them, and they connect in using sound. It's almost like sculpture or something. It's not really quite like music. And clearly it influenced Nirvana, so it influenced like all of culture. But it's also just like, if look at like Greg Anderson's, from what False Liberty's Son and all that, like that, and then Dylan from Earth, and like it became this whole thing. But it also fucking influenced Bikini Kill. Like, it's not just a genre. It's like, I mean, at least for me, and I think to varying degrees other people too.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, Fucked Up would not be fucked up without the Melvins. Like, they're a band that hearing as a young person, like the way, the one, like you're saying, the positive thing about Nirvana is like the Melvins all of a sudden went from being this sort of like cult thing in Los Angeles on Alchemy Records to being like a mainstream band that were on Much Music. So I would see them, and you could buy their CDs in stores, and they were on Atlantic, and so like, yeah, they changed my life.
Yeah, and I don't know, they're just incredible performers. But it honestly, it seems like a joke to say to performing, but it is performance. Like, it's not theater, like it's not entertainment, but it is performance. Like I've talked to Buzz about it, and he's just like, yeah, like I think of a live show as like as one piece of music. Because I'm just like, how do you guys even sync up like that? Like, I don't see anyone count off the song. Like, we used to like look at them and like, are they counting it off like by blinking their eyes? But they're not looking at each other. So like, how do they know when to go into the next part? Like, to this day, like, I don't like, I can play drums pretty good. I can't fucking do I don't understand what Vail's drumming is, you know? Like, I can try and play along with it. I can try to tap my fingers along with it. It's like, I can't count it, you know? Like, I don't get it. Like, it's just this very I don't wanna say complicated because it almost seems, like, simple, but there's just something going on there that I don't understand with my brain, but I just, like, feel it, you know?
Oh yeah, I saw them do a Wipers cover, and it was the best Wipers song I've ever heard. And I love the Wipers, like they're one of my favorite bands. But hearing their version of the Wipers song, I'm like, holy fuck! I think I've heard the way this song was meant to be played.
Yeah, the Youth of America, that was amazing.
Insane! Like, and Buzz was telling me it's based on a version he saw them play live once, and that's like way back when, and that's what he's built this cover on.
That was probably the show I missed, yeah, because I was too young. I don't know. I had this memory of, like, the Wipers playing Youth of America at the show that I saw, and then I listened to the live tape, and it's not on there, and I was just like, "Maybe they did it as an encore."
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I and then but you can't trust your memory, right? Because 'Cause you're just like, "Well, maybe I just made that up." Like, I thought that happened, but I could have just invented it.
It's interesting to look at Buzz and Ian and the similarity I see between the two of the Ian Mackay. I mean, obviously,
Yeah, yeah.
the similarity between these two guys is they both placed great, like, not value on what they did, but they knew how important the work they were putting out is, which I think is like I certainly don't feel that level of confidence in what I put out. Like there's a level of insecurity to what I'm doing and feeling it out. But I feel with those two guys, there's like this sort of singularity in vision where they knew right from the get-go, like they're just teenagers putting out these, awesome but shitty punk bands, but they knew that these things were going to be celebrated all these years later somehow, or on some level at least, it seems.
Or maybe they just took it seriously, you know? Like, maybe it was I don't know. Like, they definitely took it seriously, and I think that's why people are, so able to make fun of Ian MacKaye because he takes shit seriously and he actually cares, you know? And that can come across as, like, humorous sometimes. But, the thing that I'll say that they do have in common is they're both Aries.
Oh wow.
I
This
mean,
is
to make it astrological, and I actually think of them as being similar personalities, and I also feel like there's something about that's funny about both of them is, like, you can't bullshit either one of them. They can at least with me, like, they look at you and they know what the fuck you're thinking, and that's why they're so good at, like, fucking with people because they can fucking tell what you're thinking even if you don't say it, right?
they're also two people that have never been wrong.
And they're both really, really funny.
Yeah, very funny. But also, I have never won an argument with either one of them because they are never wrong.
Well, yeah, let's just say that they know what they both know their own minds. They know what
Mm-hmm.
their own beliefs are, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very clear to them.
Yeah, and it's just like that idea of these two people that followed their own vision. Like I don't see either of them. I had this conversation with someone the other day, like who would be the person Ian would freak out to meet that he would be super excited about? Because, like, obviously Henry, you see him around different musicians and he gets very excited, and you see the other side of Henry Rollins when he's like geeking out about Dinosaur Jr. or something. But I can't imagine Ian ever having that in the same way I can't imagine Buzz ever having that.
I mean, I don't know, like, I feel like Ian does have that, like, um, I mean, maybe not in a Rollins kind of way, but I remember him, like, showing me some shit that he, like, I was at Discord House one time, and he, like, showed me some stuff that he got, like, on that time that Minor Threat, like, took the bus to LA or whatever, and he's, like, showing me some Germs flyers and, like, telling me about that stuff, and I was just like he's like, "Oh, you like the Germs? Like, come check this shit out," and I was like I mean, I feel like he's very reverent about that stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, he's one of us, like like a hardcore kid, like this idea that we're all like we're talking about like I brought up earlier for my like the navel gazing that punk rock has, and that we're all interested in the way we were brought to this culture and how we fit into this culture. I find
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, like, yeah, it's a good question. What would Ian freak out about? I don't know. He
I
likes all
was
kinds of stuff.
the Nuge, but the Nuge is too fucked up politically. I was trying to think of Lux Interior, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I can't picture him asking for an autograph. That would be the I just don't see that ever happening. But maybe it does. Maybe there is someone out
I
there.
mean, I know people who know him better. I can ask.
Okay, get back to me on
I don't
that.
talk to him very often, but I haven't seen him in a while. But
You,
yeah, it's a fascinating question now that you brought it up.
you have sold me on astrology though, with telling me that Buzz and Ian have the same symbol, star symbol, because there's no other reason to explain the similarities other than this, I think. But I'm now going to pursue this
Well, go
line
yeah,
of
go read about the Aries. They're the baby of the zodiac.
I got to now. One thing I want to ask you about also that you brought up last time was Born Against, and
Mhm.
you mentioned how they were one of the bands that kind of got you back into to liking hardcore around a time period. But when did you first see them, and what was it about that band you think that kind of got you hooked again for that kind of sound?
Well, we played with Born Against and Nation of Ulysses on out in some shows in the Northeast in like 1991, and I didn't really know that hardcore. Well, I think I mentioned before, I don't know that much even about the original like hardcore, like New York hardcore or Boston hardcore, like any of that. I didn't really know much about it. I knew about DC and like, Negative Approach and that kind of the Necros and all that, but I didn't really know much about the bands in the Northeast part of the country, hardcore bands anyways. So yeah, it was interesting to me because like somebody said that like we played a matinee at CBGB. I don't think that happened, but I got in an argument with someone about it. I was like, that show wasn't a matinee, but it's like, okay, yes, it was. I was like, no, it wasn't. But we did play with Born Against at CBGB, Unwound, and Nation of Ulysses. I don't really remember watching them though. Like I don't remember being like super into Born Against until Brooks was in it, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you mentioned, his drumming, and it is, I don't know, they're a fascinating band to look at too, because they were a band that, as everything's getting, exploding and getting more popular, they're the band that is sort of waving that DIY all ages flag a little bit.
I remember now, like, okay, I do remember what it was about Sam in particular, though, before Brooks was in the band. So we played this show in 91, like at Wesleyan College, and it was that show was during the day. And my friend Steve Dorr's hardcore band Mod also played that show, and he was like 14 years old, which we didn't meet him then, but like, we're still friends today, so it's funny. But like Kathy and I were like in I don't know, the lounge or something, like at Wesleyan, like this fancy bathroom. And we're putting on makeup and trying to like get ready for our show. We were not on the bill. We were like, we're playing this show. Like, why didn't you put us on it or whatever? We're on tour with Nation of Ulysses. They're like, we just couldn't get you on the bill. And we're like, we're gonna play anyways. And so we were just like basically like, told everyone we were gonna play. So we're like getting ready to play and like not really paying attention to this hardcore band or whatever. And then Sam like ran into the bathroom and he had like a megaphone, I think. Maybe not a megaphone. Maybe he was just screaming, but he was like, I was like, that's the singer of the band. And he like ran into the bathroom and he was just like screaming like in our faces. And I was like, what's up with that guy? And then honestly, it's like reminded me of Doc Dart or something. And I was like, that guy's incredible. And then like, I remember like talking to him and being like, he's like the most neurotic person that I've ever met. Like hearing like all of this like just constantly apologizing and all this stuff and then like hearing about all this like crazy stuff of something like, well, they're gonna have to leave New York because like the guys from Sick of It All want to kill them and all this shit. And I'm like, who's sick of it all? Like I didn't know any of that shit. And I was just like, so there's like these gangsters in New York and then they're like in the hardcore scene and they hate Born Against and blah blah blah. And it just seemed really interesting to me. And then I started reading his columns in Maximum Rock and Roll and I think I wrote him a letter. Um, you know, and we started becoming pen pals or whatever. But by the time Brooks was in the band, like I was really into it. And also like I don't think I'd ever heard like what's that band that they're really influenced by? Articles of Faith. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, from
I
Chicago.
didn't have those records and I remember like I think it was Alternative Tentacles like put those out on CD and I started listening to that. I was like, you guys are just like exactly ripping off Articles of Faith. And he's like, yeah, I know. It's kind of embarrassing. I was like, so like I'd never heard it. So, to me it was like really exciting. But I still think they're a good band. They were but incredible live performer, really funny, great writer. We used to just like talk on the phone.
Yeah, though they're one of my, I never got to see them live, but I just like through videos and obviously loving their records. And Kill Rock Stars reissued. Is that? I guess that's eventually leads to the Kill Rock Stars reissues.
Yeah, that must it's hard to remember. I feel like I used to have all the Matrix numbers memorized. Now I can't even remember what we put out. But yeah, I think we did. We put them out on CD, right?
Yeah.
Because he stopped doing the label.
Yeah. Yeah. They went back into print at that point. And like a band that once again probably found like a whole other audience because of the association with Kill Rock Stars, because Kill Rock Stars was kind of part of a different world than Born Against Occupied.
Yeah, I mean, we had like a lot of different kinds of people ordered the record. That was what was kind of cool about Kill Rock Stars is it wasn't just one aesthetic, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't genre based label. It was like all different kinds of music.
Yeah. No, and that's why I guess I love all that stuff from the Pacific Northwest because it all does feel like punk to me, but it's all sounds different. Like, did you consider Riot Grrrl and Bikini Kill like you felt like you were a hardcore, or did you? I didn't mean to put this on you. Did you feel like you were a hardcore band or a punk band, or did you feel like you were doing something that's a break from that?
I mean, by that point, I was like really like when the Bikini first started, I was like against hardcore coming back. So like, I wouldn't have said that we were hardcore. And I remember like, before we moved to DC, like I was pen pals with Guy Picciotto and also with Ian Svenonius and Tim Green and Cynthia Connolly, like writing a lot of letters when the year that Bikini Kill was starting. I remember writing to Guy like, I don't think punk is viable. I think we need to start something else. And he was just like, I think you should reconsider. Like, I don't think like just because like dumbasses have taken over punk or whatever like doesn't mean or it's not over. Like we can still it's still useful. And him like telling me like me like mentioning to him like maybe we'll just start something else and just like punk will be over. He was just like no like punk is going to continue and you don't need to like let the people who are doing all this who are ruining punk for you, don't let them define it. Like you can define it. That's what punk is, kind of thing. And like that really stuck with me. So I think I felt more like we were like the Sex Pistols, like in a punk way, like doing like a more like Avengers, Sex Pistols kind of thing when Bikini Kill first started. But if you look at it from a cultural perspective, and I have talked about like when I talk to my friends in England or whatever, like it's like, no, we were a part of American hardcore, like because culturally we were like we weren't trying to take it to the mainstream, like we weren't trying to get on TV, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't our main ambition. It wasn't like we wouldn't have been on TV. If someone asked us to play SNL, we would play SNL. But like that wasn't what we were going for, right? We were trying to create this culture outside of the music industry because we believed in this ideal of cultural democracy that you don't have to fucking buy culture at the store. You can create it and share it with your friends, like you want to have a party, like start a band, you don't have to like hire a band that already exists. Like you don't have to buy it at the store. You just like create it. It's a kid created universe basically.
Did you ever get approached by major labels at you know,
Yes.
and was that ever like a temptation, or is that just something that was too ridiculous to even consider?
For me, that was this hard no.
Yeah.
I was completely closed-minded about it. I was like, no, I would rather quit the band. I can't speak for everyone else, but I think we're in agreement about that, but my main reason for that was realism. Like it wasn't even just politics, although my politics at the time were very much like DIY, like fuck major labels, fuck corporations, like this is existing outside of it or whatever. Like realistically, that would have broken up the band, it for sure would have broken up the band. Like we could barely make decisions, in a DIY realm. Like it was hard for that. It was hard for us to function. And, for some of the same reasons that like I don't know, I wouldn't want some of the people at the time in our band to have that much access to that much money, like the whole thing, like with Kurt, like, like you take someone with an addictive personality who's like got mental illness and, untreated mental illness and addiction issues, and you give them all the money in the world and you put them on tour forever. Like we didn't need that kind of shit in our band.
Well, and it's interesting. There's no one looking out for you. Like
Yeah.
considering that you are a commodity to these people at these labels, you'd think they would have people looking out for their investments and trying to provide psychological help and trying to provide these things to keep these people together. But
I mean, there's way too many people making way too much money, you know. But at the same time, like you would hope that someone, I mean, I would hope, like I don't know enough about it. I would hope there were people. I know there were people that cared that were trying to help, but like, you know, at the same time, like you can't save someone. Like you really can't, you know. Like if they're gonna self-destruct, they're gonna self-destruct. So it was unfortunate. Like it was really unfortunate that the way that that all went down, and it should not have happened that way.
and not to excuse what happens with people, but I think at the same time that we are provided with the industries with the tools to self-destruct in this industry. Like every night there's going to be booze backstage no matter what. And even if you try and keep that booze away, there's going to be someone that wants to buy you a drink or someone that's going to want to slip you some drugs. Like it just feels like it's so baked into this industry in
Yeah,
a
for
lot of
sure.
ways.
I mean, you know, like and on the positive side, we have Music Cares, and Music Cares has gotten many of my friends into rehab, and you know, it doesn't always work the first time. Rehab doesn't work for everyone, but like it saves lives. Like if you're in a band and you are having substance abuse problems, like even if you're in an underground band, check out Music Cares. Like they can actually help you get your shit together. It does work, you know, for some people.
When you got to DC, did you ever see bands like any of the hardcore stuff? Because the DC thing had almost become, it seems like, from when I talk to people, like a thing unto itself at a certain point in DC, the Discord thing. Um, and there was like another scene that existed at the same time. Did you have feet in both worlds, or are you mainly part of the Discord world when you're in DC?
You mean like Royal Trucks and all that?
Well, Royal
Or
Truck certainly, but like even like there's like Battery or bands that are more kind of the ebullition side of things that are like the younger bands that would be more kind of in keeping with Born Against or
I
Unwound.
mean, we for sure played shows with some of those bands. I don't remember super well, like what those bands, I don't remember that much about that scene. Like Amanda Mackay's band,
Hmm.
Desperado, is that what they're called? I can't remember.
Yeah, and
Uh,
like there's Battery, Damnation AD, and Far Cry, and there's like a lot of obviously more hardcore stuff happening too at the same time.
we definitely played a lot of hardcore shows and with a lot of straight edge bands that I didn't find very engaging. We personally, but you know, we also played with our friends a lot. Like we played with Nation of Ulysses a lot. We tried to play with Royal Trucks so many times because we were actually obsessed with them, or at least Billy and I were, and I think to some degree Kathy was. The last time they canceled, you know, they always said that they'd play with us. They never did. I never even got to see them. But like we would like write them letters. Like um, some of us worked with Jennifer, but like that's another story. But like it was hard to you know, bridge that gap between, like, you'd go to 930 Club because we could get in free to a lot of shows. We didn't have any money when we lived there. I mean, you know, at all. And so some of the perks would be like, well, if we get in a 930 show, 930 Club tonight, we could probably like go hang out backstage and maybe like someone would have like a sandwich that we could eat. Like, you know, it was just that kind of desperation of like, you not like, I remember hanging out with Babes in Toyland and like one time like Michael Stipe or like, you know, someone was like, oh, this is my friend Michael Stipe, or you know, and then like Dave Grohl's here, and like, are you see people like that, and I'd be like, it was just like, oh God, can I have the sandwich? And like, you can take the whole deli tray home, you know, like we're really struggling when we lived there, but
Oh yeah, I've stolen AFI's orange juice. I know the feeling.
I remember like you'd see like, you know, Jennifer Harriman, Neil, they would like come into the show and they would look so cool. You'd be like,
Hmm.
how can anyone be that cool? You know, so basically like we're kind of obsessed with them. Or some of us were kind of obsessed with them, and that was interesting. Um,
When she was on the show, it's wild that she was like a hardcore kid. Like she was like going to Void shows and Minor Threat shows, and she was saying that the big influence on her for Royal Trucks in the melody behind all the distortion was listening to Discharge, which I thought was so awesome.
oh, that's cool. I have to listen to that one. I didn't listen to it. I have seen her perform now, but not never when I live in DC. I think she's amazing, and the guitar playing in that band is incredible too. We made friends with Chris Bald when we lived in DC, and he roadied for us for a while, and that was really exciting because it was like the Frumpies practiced at U Street, which was like his practice space, and he was very supportive of the Frumpies and Bratmobile and stuff. He loved like Riot Grrrl or whatever, and so that was cool. I was like, oh God, it's like you meet somebody who is in the faith, like that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Is it weird now that every seemingly quote unquote alternative band from the 90s gets lumped in with Riot Grrrl? It seems like certainly by the music press, it seems like that happens.
Well, I mean, that brings up the question of like, it's funny because like I just did an interview like a couple days ago about this, but like we don't, I mean, like people now are just like Bikini Kill is Riot Grrrl, like it's a synonymous thing. And it's like, first of all, we didn't feel that way at the time. Second of all, like it's not a musical genre. It wasn't then, it's not now. It's like, well, is it even worth saying that it's not because people think it is? It's like, well, okay, it can like, it's a marketing term. You can create a Spotify playlist or whatever the fuck. But like, I don't know hardly any bands at the time that would have called themselves that, And we definitely didn't call ourselves that. I think Bratmobile and Heaven's to Betsy probably did. But like, I don't know, like, I would be so fucking annoyed if I was in a band, if like I was a woman in a band in the 90s and like the only way that like I would get written about, then I'm talking about this like as if I'm not me. Like if I'm like in a different band and like if someone was like writing about an article about Riot Grrrl and then they lumped me in, that would be so frustrating. Like say, for example, like 7 Year Bitch. 7 Year Bitch are constantly like, well, we weren't really a Riot Grrrl band. Like, like we knew some of those people and we supported it and they totally did. If they're talking about us or Bratmobile or whatever, and it's like, but we didn't really, we saw of ourselves as more of like a hard rock, like, and basically like it's kind of sexist because like if anything, like the Gits and 7 Year Bitch and even L7, like they were in the same scene as like Nirvana, like they were rock bands, and we were more of a punk scene. For if we are going to accept even that that's a genre, but like it became like this thing that like like people had to talk about all the time, and I'm like it's not even like a useful framework in some ways. Like why can't we just talk about like feminism within punk or like women in punk or whatever, like political hardcore? Like why does it always have to be based on this one scene that's like almost like mythological, like a jackalope or like I don't know. Like I could go get a PhD and write my thesis on it, just like all these other people have done. And I'm sure there's a lot of money in that. But like, is it real? Like, did it even happen? I mean, yes, it happened. But like, what happened? I don't fucking know.
Well, you got to write a book, right? You know that. Like at one point, there's got to be your music book, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an autobiography or anything, but just like you just experienced so much and contributed so much to this thing. Like it would be fascinating to read it all put to paper.
Part of why I'm like doing these interviews is because I have some time, and so I'm just like, well, yeah, I have a lot of stories, but like, what do people really want to know? Or what about like the things that I've experienced like is worth sharing to the larger group or whatever. So thank you for the conversation.
Well, anytime, and when the book comes out, I hope you come back for another session of epic conversation. This now, Tobi, is the longest episode ever of Turned Out a Punk. And I cannot think of a more worthy guest. So thank you for doing it.
You should break it up into chunks so people don't get bored.
Oh my gosh, no! This has to be put out in its epic form, unedited.
Come on. All right. Well, thank you for your time too. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tobi, for coming on the show. And you heard right there, at some point, Tobi will be back for a part 2. And hopefully that book will be coming at some point because I cannot wait to read that thing. And that is that. Check out Bikini Kill on tour. Check out that Girlsperm record. And that is it. Oh my gosh. Whew. I'm buzzing from that episode. I'm very excited about that one. That was a fun one. Speaking of fun, coming up on the next episode of Turned Out a Punk, they just announced their first North American tour, shows at least. Well, they've announced it one at least so far that I know of. From the UK, from the band Big Joni, Stephanie Phillips will be on the show, joining me to talk about punk, to talk about British punk, to talk about DIY. It's a fun conversation, and I am very excited for you to hear it. And that is on the next episode of this podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As always, Black Lives Matter. The lives and issues of indigenous peoples matter. We need to protect trans kids and help trans people protect themselves and their rights and stop hate and violence towards people of different faiths and different races and different nationalities, because what we're talking about here isn't politics. This is just basic human rights stuff. People deserve to be able to live free from hatred and discrimination. And I add to that, people deserve to have the right to choose what they want to do with their reproductive systems, and that must be a right that's protected, because people are coming for these rights in Canada too. This is not just something that's happening in the United States. I'm sure it's happening all over the world, because there are people that see benefit in denying people their rights. And if there are organizations that are doing good work that you believe in, get involved in them. Lend your time, lend your money. If you can, lend your voice, because the world gets better when you start making it better. Speaking of making things better, speaking of making things better, anyone can do this shit. Start a band, start a fanzine, start a podcast, start something. Just contribute to the culture in some way, because it gets better when you add to it, and it'll make you feel better too. Maybe just start by drawing some pictures for yourself. Just do something creative. Speaking about doing something, sign your organ donor cards, because by the time they come looking for those organs, you don't need them. And I've seen miracles happen when people sign their organ donor cards. I've seen it with my own eyes. And it is truly amazing. And because you don't need those organs anymore at that point at all. Maybe try meditating, because I didn't believe in it, and I tried it, and it works for me, and maybe it'll work for you. It's something that you have to force yourself to do, but every time you do it, you feel better afterwards. Well, speaking for myself. And maybe it'll work for you too. What's the worst that can happen? Just try it. All right, that is it for me. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.